we're gonna get rolling. I'm gonna give Temporal a call in just a moment, and then we're gonna get rolling. But yeah, so Temporal. Well, I guess I'll introduce him in a moment. First, okay. Hello, long time no chat.
It has been a while. How you doing?
Doing pretty well. Chat, let me know how the volume is, because sometimes I tend to be a little quiet, but yeah, good to hear from you, man. Do you kind of want to give yourself a little bit of a shout out, like kind of just like who you are, what you do, to chat,
Sure,
and then I can kind of tell like where our relationship began a long time ago.
it did. So I am Temporal. I am a former contenders coach turned, I don't want to call it private coaching because much of what I do is public, but turned coach, we'll say, slash content creator. So
Sure.
these days I'm, just doing the content creation stuff, seeing a lot of VOD reviews out of me. If you're looking for the one-on-one stuff, the micro stuff, that's currently what I'm doing a lot of. But
Sick.
my history, Phase 2, Sydney Drop Bears, had a lot of fun, worked with Spilo on a couple of those teams, and it's been a blast.
Sick, awesome. Well, I've known Temporal for literally years now, since I first started getting into team coaching. On the second team I ever coached, and really the first time I actually coached was
Yeah.
Lividosity University, that High Masters team, and Temporal was the coach for the main team, the non-university team, the whole 4.3K team. And I came to you with all of my gameplay questions, question after question after question. You're always more than considerate and really helped me out greatly learning the game. And then from there on to Chicken Contendies, turned I guess it was a Grunto Esports, turned Third Impact down the road. And then Sydney Drop Bears after that as well. And I'm still to this day incensed and offended that you never got the Overwatch League opportunity. But unfortunate, it is what it is. You've made your life choices, and you've done a lot of great things. And hey, you're back, at least for a little bit, and we're glad to have you back. A lot of the reviews I thoroughly enjoy. I still watch them. And Chat, like I said, he's really, as he said, he does a lot of those one-on-one reviews. Great coach, and really was my coach for a long time, at least when it came to the game. So yeah, we had a plan, as I'm describing the chat, that we wanted to do a team coach. So you had a replay code of like some GM team, correct?
Yeah, no, we had a nice 4.4 lobby set up. It was going to be great. And then 20 minutes, 30 minutes before we were scheduled for this, it was, we're going to drop the patch.
Yeah, so the patch dropped, and so did my heart, and that pretty much ended that idea. So the last second, I was like, this is something I wanted to do for a while, but I was like, I figured we're probably going to have to make a video out of this. I was not planning on streaming it for obvious reasons.
This is going to be fun on the spot. And people are
yeah.
going to call us out when we totally forget about minor metas that happen. This is great.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly, for the sub. I'll do a couple squats in a second. So the idea is what makes a meta is that we're going to discuss like what, not just the individual metas specifically, but like on the grand scheme, what in Overwatch, what is it about Overwatch that lends itself towards making a meta, and then like how do you break that mold? Like what kind of like what causes a meta to come about, and we'll talk about that. And then obviously like we'd like to go into the details of each meta, and not overly specific on the micro. We don't have time for that.
Sure.
But just to touch on each of them, because I know you and I have both had opportunities to work with each of them and probably have different knowledge sets that will complement. And I think the first thing first is, do you kind of want to like explain like what is a meta for those of us that maybe aren't involved in competitive Overwatch? Like what is meta? Like what does it mean?
Sure. So meta is simply a calculation of, hey, how are people playing the game? And based on how people are playing the game, what is the strategy that we can think about? It's not just about the game itself, but it's also about outside of the game. What are people doing right now? So a meta can evolve even without patches changing, because a meta really is how are people playing the game? What is being used? How are people playing the game? What combination spheres? What combinations of abilities? How are people trying to win? And because you can get some feel for that, like a meta might be, in the Overwatch world, 70% of teams are running something really tank heavy, 30% of teams are running, something very dive heavy. So what we want to do might be a calculation of, it has to be able to beat this, it has to be more favored against a brawl heavy team than it does a dive heavy team, but it can't fold to that. And metas can evolve even without rule changes, even without patches. to get to places, just because the way that the people out there are playing the game changes, which makes different things effective. Strategy A can beat B, but not C, and it evolves like that. I'm sure you
Exactly.
can do a better description, but I really don't want to fall back on the backronym because it's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I think, like you said, it's as people's understanding evolves, and it doesn't even require a patch. I think sometimes the
Hmm.
patch can almost be psychological. Oh, this is 0.5% harder to accomplish this. Well, then clearly that's not the best strategy.
Hmm.
But and people will over exaggerate. But ultimately, I think what we've seen with Overwatch is, I mean, obviously, hindsight's 2020 here, so we'll see what I think in 6 months. But I think over time, I think especially with the fact that new heroes haven't been released, I think metas have become more stable. In other words, we see less wild swings from the left or to the right or forward or back, and people are starting to understand what is this hero good at, and more importantly, how is the game of Overwatch played? Like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of different things?
I
We've
think
got.
that's
Go ahead.
mostly true. I think that's probably mostly true, and you've done more team coaching more recently than me. I'm doing some, but never for long periods of time, etc. right now. And I think the counterbalance to that is, hey, we have been seeing faster balance changes than we did before. So we're
True.
seeing more patches. So and each patch is sort of an excuse for people to like
Mhm.
that makes the spark, like you talked about, for people to try different things. So
Exactly.
I don't know if the metas are more stable now. Like that would be up for debate
So,
in
so,
my
so,
mind.
so when I sorry, let me clarify what I mean. When I mean more
Sure.
stable, I mean in regards to the meta being played is most likely a very strong composition and not likely just a
Ah,
flavor of the month. In other words, as
sure.
for example, like remember the was it the ice fishing composition for a while? I feel
Yep.
like it was like the Arissa Hog Hanzo. Like I felt like or May. I felt like that was not a really great composition.
It's almost like we had the same thought, and that's why while other teams were playing that 25% of the time, we
Right.
one-tricked the other comp.
Right,
It's almost
exactly.
like that was a thing.
I know, and it paid off. But it felt like a lot of some of these compositions. It's like I feel like that comp isn't that good. It's just not. It's just like nobody has any better ideas right now.
Right.
So, and I think as people start to understand, and you and I are both people that harp on map control and angles a lot. We can kind of start to look at how these metas lived and died from those set of glasses, right?
Sure.
And also obviously like the heroes that make up those. So I think one thing to set us off before we start looking at the individual things is what makes a meta. For me, I always look at who are the really dominant heroes in Overwatch. Like who are the really strong heroes, whether it's through nerfs and buffs, whatever. Who are the heroes that are really, really strong? And then I think once you answer that question, whether it's one hero or two or three or even four, you then need to find heroes that complement that hero properly. For example, we'll talk, I'm sure, more about it later, but we had a Winston, Reaper, Sombra, Diva, Moira, Lucio meta for a while, and I don't think anybody thinks Moira is overpowered, at least anybody over Platinum.
Sure. Sure.
And you look at Winston's certainly not overpowered, but at that point in time,
Oh,
Sombra.
he might be. We might change our tune
Well,
on that a year from now, but
right.
go
But
ahead.
at that point in time, right, at least not
Sure.
perceived as OP, but and same thing to an extent. Diva might be a little overtuned, but it was Sombra. Sombra was so very dominant that you ended up playing heroes with either escape cooldowns, ways of
Mhm.
counterplaying EMP, and then heroes that enabled their Sombra to farm or disabled the enemy Sombra. And so you saw like a meta evolve around that hero. With all the double shield metas that we saw, double shield, double shield, double shield, double shield. Well, a lot of that, Brig got scapegoated. A lot of the spam DPS got scapegoated. But ultimately, I think you kind of looked at Orisa Sigma as being a extremely strong tank duo that other
So,
tank duos kind of struggle. So when I see
sure.
meta, I see a couple of heroes that are just really strong, and people pick heroes around that hero to fit them. And so I've always said my like little soundbite is that a hero can have, in pro level anyway, a 70-80% pick rate and not be considered overpowered.
So I think I'm with you like 70-80% of the way that is sort of what contributes to a meta, because it's again based on what everyone is playing, and what everyone is playing is sparked by, hey, what one or two heroes are overtuned compared to the rest of the cast. But I think the missing piece there, and you probably think about this, it probably just didn't come out, is what are pro players comfortable with playing? And what I mean by that is, how do they know how to play the game? Dive, for example, stuck around for so long and everything was forced into Dive in some ways because, hey, they know how to play comps that do this type of thing. And then,
Right.
when snipers came along, okay, we know how to do this thing. And actually, a good example would be the May Reaper comp and ice
Right.
fishing that came out. May Reaper sort of came along. Was that really the best way to play the game right then? Honestly, probably not. But
No.
players were very comfortable with how to play brawl heavy comps, and that was the best brawl heavy comp available.
Right.
So there's something to be said for, hey, we're going to take the thing that works on the skill sets we need
Hmm.
because, the metas take time to evolve and it's just too big a shift off of a
Hmm.
patch to go, hey, now the best hero in the game is something that's never been played. Oh, shoot, how do we make this work?
Right. So we could describe metas as almost being sticky, where in terms
Yep.
of play style, like people will pick up a play style and they want to play that play style and they don't want to leave it until it's absolutely trash. We went from like goats to essentially double shield goats for a little while, in a lot of ways in terms of like the brawlier play style. And even though double shield made a comeback, it showed up spam that fall, early that winter. Pretty quickly afterwards, once we saw the first round of nerfs, it instantly reverted back to Ryan D.Va, Reaper May, Kree Lucio, more Ana Lucio, whatever, for several months.
Yeah.
So, and then again, when that's nerfed, we're not going back to dive. We're going to go back to double shield. So people kind of, like you said, like they're comfortable with a play style. They want to play that play style, and that's not a dig on the pro players. It's just psychological. People have a comfort zone, and ultimately, like when you're considering professional Overwatch, where people only have a couple weeks of getting good at something, they want to get so good at something that won't take an entire new revamping of how they approach something.
Exactly.
So I think that's kind of wraps up that discussion. Unless you have anything else to add.
No, I think
Okay.
I think we can move from here.
So we can start, I guess. This is something that I'm less familiar with because honestly, at this point in time, I was just probably like silver gold, watching Overwatch League like once a week and going,
Sure.
oh, Pog, Genji Blade. I don't have no idea
Sure.
what was going on. So early Overwatch League metas, what were we looking at here that you can remember?
Well, are we talking Overwatch League or are we talking professional Overwatch? Because if we start with Overwatch League, Moth was pretty much the first serious thing we saw.
Let's start with Overwatch League because before then it gets
Sure.
shady and there's just so many of them. So
Sure, that's fine. So really in Overwatch League, the first thing that we saw that really had power was the Moth meta. I mean, we were looking at that and we were going, hey, this Mercy is really, really overtuned. She had more heals per second, I believe, than she did now. Her Valk gave her extra charges of res. Her Valk lasted longer. Like, this was a powerful hero. And the thing that people liked about that, of course, was that Mercy being powerful was something that enabled a lot of heroes who might not otherwise have seen play. Like we saw
Right.
Junkrat was considered powerful back then. We saw Mercy was a pretty flexible meta in terms of her ability to pocket, made almost anyone she could pocket almost force their way into more viability than we'd have seen in pretty much any other situation. So that was really the first meta. And, mostly people ended up playing dive with it because dive was sort of the history of what had come before that when we're talking sticky metas. And they were the heroes that made sense. I mean, there was things like longer contests on carts than we have now, etc. Less total sustain in the game. But Mercy was really sort of the key
Right.
to that working. Plus, hey, previous metas were dive. Dive is still something we know how to play, and dive is still relatively good.
Right. Now, at that meta, I distinctly remember Junkrat had no fall off in his concussion mine, so he could basically two-tap somebody instantly without even having to aim.
So he had recently been buffed to get the second mind charge and to have a faster tire than he has now as well. So
Okay.
that combined with players not yet being, his tire before that had been really, really quite slow by today's standards.
Yeah.
And at that time, it went to a speed that's even faster than the one we have now.
Right,
So
right.
again, that skill that people don't have, that tire was particularly effective because people just weren't used to the speed yet, even at the pro
Right.
level. And it got worse and it got patched to slow down.
Right. Now, what made Mercy strong at that point in time? Because I feel like when it's Moth meta, it's not spam
Yes.
meta or half dive meta. It's literally Mercy meta. That was the name. She was 100% pick rate. I think I remember at that point it started leaking down into rank because at that point I was like a gold, main tank player, and everyone wanted a Mercy. Everybody wanted a Mercy. What was powerful?
Oh,
about her?
absolutely. So what was really powerful about her is the number of reses that she could get off was pretty insane. Like, remember, originally res was a mass res, ultimate, etc. But
Right.
she went from that to being able to go, okay, she's got res on a cooldown, she can pop a res, she can Valk, and then by the end of the Valk, she potentially has another res so that she can line up there. So you're looking at like 3 reses in one team fight, and I'm sorry, that's just insane. Like,
Yeah, that was
Overwatch is a
nuts.
6v6 game. team man advantage is huge. We all know man, like, when we come of the tiers of Overwatch, we could argue whether man advantage or position advantage is bigger, but it's a big deal, and
Yeah,
they're
it
both
is.
bigger than ult advantage. So
Yes.
going, well, usually. So going, no, we have 3 extra lives is just, well, okay.
No, was the
Who's
res
yeah.
instant as well? I can't remember.
It was instant during Valk, if memory serves. I could
Okay.
be misremembering there. It's been a while.
Okay.
But even the current res, it's not.
No.
Res isn't a terribly long ability, and it's not that hard to cover with tanks, etc. And it's not that hard to cover when you're mostly playing with dive heroes that can immediately get to spots and
Right.
deny spots that they need to.
Right. Right. Okay. So that's obviously busted.
Yes.
And what followed that? Like, what broke that? And was it goats after? Was there any like?
No. Well, actually, so what happened is we saw she got hit pretty hard with nerfs. So you were looking at, a maximum of 2 reses. It was hard to get. Then she got down to eventually, hey, Valk doesn't do anything to your res charges. We saw some Valk time shortening. We saw really all of those things that we talked about were, hey, she had multiple res charges. Hey, she had a longer lasting Valk. Hey, she actually had, faster movement speed, etc. We saw all of that stuff brought down by Blizzard finally for the fourth stage, I believe, of
Right.
L there,
Right.
and that was able to mostly do it. You certainly still saw Mercy be played, but it wasn't Mercy anymore. We went into snipers as the meta at that point. We started going,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
let's run Hanzo Widow. So Mercy's still seeing play, and people know how to use a Mercy, and Mercy enables those heroes quite well. But we went into snipers, and part of that was, hey, we brought down Mercy, so she's just not making everything out ridiculous anymore. And also we got Briggs released. So when we got Brig, that meant, oh hey, even with the rudimentary version of her that no one knew how to play, etc., it was suddenly a big kick to dive. And dive was most of the history, etc., but dive was most of the history of play. So we didn't
Right.
immediately move to tanks at that point because, hey, Mercy doesn't work at all with tanks. Like Mercy
Right.
does not work in brawl comps, etc. But it's this, hey, we can't play dive anymore. Mercy is still pretty good. We all know how to play Mercy, etc. Let's move into this double poke where we're
Right.
controlling 2, 3 angles with our double snipers, Hog Orisa type thing.
So you're thinking that Brig maybe on release meant that, hey, I don't like playing Genji and Tracer with this dive anymore. But I can definitely still play snipers. And kind of like, it was, in other words, Brig disabled dive, didn't quite disable dive, but she definitely disabled dive DPS from being attractive in a lot of that stage.
She definitely disabled dive DPS from being attractive, but what was really interesting about her is she was a shadow pick. No one had to run a Brig for the entirety. Like sometimes Brig was run, but no one actually had to run her because you'll notice what we're talking about is we're talking a Hanzo Widow, and then of course with that you're going to run a Mercy
Right.
Zen, something along those lines. No
Right.
one actually has to pick the Brig for Brig to do what she did to sort
Right.
of
It's the
dumpster
fear.
dive as an option
Right.
because exactly she was in a place and she was so overtuned that she countered dive effectively by herself. So it
Right.
becomes the if you swap to dive, which is 4 hero swaps, we're going to say we get to swap 1 hero from our poke comp and we beat you. And you just can't maintain
This
ult
is going
economies
to
when
make
that's
for
the
a
case.
fantastic
So you
history
had
of
to play poke
Overwatch
to do it,
metas
or you could have
YouTube
brawled.
vid.
But that's the game. People didn't know how to brawl. The only brawl we'd seen at that point in the history of Overwatch really was the original Ninjas in Pajamas triple tank
Yeah.
ages ago.
Yeah. Okay. So my question for you to get your opinion on this is that we talked
Please.
about the double snipers and etc. Now I distinctly remember this was right about the time when I was seriously grinding. Mothman, I was at like right in the tail end, and I distinctly remember in ranked we had a period of time where it was Ryan. This is ranked. Keep in mind Ryan, Zarya, Hanzo, Zen, Mercy, Brig, and I remember it was
Yeah.
damage boosted Grav Dragon over and over and over again. And I distinctly remember that being the meta that made me quit playing main tank. I became a flex support man
Okay.
after that because Ryan
So
was miserable because you could just bash through shield and etc. And you literally could not play monkey. And I
mhm,
think that was when you could damage boost Dragon, and Hanzo had just gotten Stormbow and Lunge. I'm
mhm.
trying to remember all of like what happened there with Hanzo.
So that did happen. If memory serves, that was a ladder only meta. I don't recall if that was because it was like between stages when we had a break, so it was being run on ladder before we saw what happened in stage 4, or if it was a case of no, I think what it was is stage 4 was run on a previous patch, then the ladder was being run on. So the ladder was having to run its own independent meta. And yes, that very much happened. That was a meta. And yes, it was, hey, Hanzo got his massive rework. Hanzo got his massive rework, and its Grav Dragon plus Mercy boost is really powerful. Mercy was still okay. She wasn't the monster that she was before. Excuse me.
Right.
It wasn't, she wasn't the monster that she was before, but she was still powerful. And yes, that was one of those rare times when we're using heavy frontline tanks with Mercy comp, etc. And sometimes that comp was played pretty balled up. I think these days that comp would run into serious issues, but again,
Yes.
people are better at Overwatch than they were back then.
Right. And I think the key thing too is like the ability to damage boost through Grav Dragon. It's like you wanted, like I know sometimes it's like you couldn't really run Brig Mercy consistently with a Reinhardt. Even then it wasn't quite enough healing, so you wanted that other support. But then, it was always a guessing game of, should I trans this Grav Dragon? Is this going to actually heal, or is it just going to might instantly get nuked? This wasn't even talking about pinning out a Grav or isolating with bubbles. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to go just damage boost Dragon. I just did it by itself. So
no, and Grav tended to be a more powerful ult back then. Like we really got a
bigger
lot
suction.
better.
It had a bigger suction.
Well,
I think
there's that, but even before that, yes, it did. It had a bigger suction that it pulled people in. It was effectively a bigger ult. It more consistently led to teamfight wins. But remember, during GOATS, we did a lot to develop Grav strategies even before Grav got nerfed. Like there was Grav effectively got worse because so much effort was invested in figuring out, what do we do, to the point where Grav was not considered the best non-support ult in GOATS by the end of it, even before it got nerfed.
Right. Give me 1 second, Temporally.
By all means.
Just a heads up, chat. Like I see a lot of you guys are giving me messages and stuff, and I really appreciate it. But for questions, put them in Ask Spilo. If it's questions regarding what we're talking about, at me, and I'll probably be able to answer them, or I'll involve them in discussion. But I'm trying to stay on topic. So if I come across this a little bit like ignoring your question, I see it, I appreciate it. For right now, I'm trying to stay a little bit on topic. But thank you guys, I really appreciate it. Okay, sorry. So then I think we're coming right up on where, at least post Overwatch League, we start to see. Well, actually, we saw a little bit of Orisa towards the end of that Overwatch League, did we not?
We did, and the reason we saw the Orisa was because we moved on to that heavy poke comp, and while Orisa hadn't really been run before that, we did get to see, really the first good Orisa we got to see. I'm totally blanking. I want to say it was London's Orisa, who just had
Gesture?
great ults for Gesture, yes. For that period in time, just had great ults that were doing huge amounts to enable those Dragon Strikes, because again, there's no Grav, so it was like, here's our little Grav, and it effectively was, but most people weren't any good at ult usage by then. So that was the first time we really saw Orisa see play. She'd been out for a while at that point, but that wasn't a hero. Poke hadn't been the meta, etc. at any point before then.
Right. And that makes sense. It's funny that we see Orisa.
Good luck staying on topic.
But then immediately afterwards, I think we see the, Overwatch League ends, double snipers over, and then, freaking GOATs.
Contenders.
What was it? Was it Hanamura? I think it was Hanamura Attack, correct? I think it was the original GOATs.
Oh, the first time GOATs brought out GOATs?
Yes.
Yeah, I think going into, I don't remember if it was going into second or going into first, but it was, some situation where it's like, well, okay, what do we do? And, that was the moment where it's like, okay, they just run all these but they run all these heroes together and they just get value. And it's nothing like what we recognize as GOATs today in terms of how they played it, but it kind of worked. It was like, hey, there's a stupid amount of sustain here when we combine all these heroes.
Yes. It was so basically people looked at that situation and they said, we're playing a meta that was very much, I think it was the first time, at least professional Overwatch that I know of, had delved that heavily into map control and angle control with double snipers. Like I remember watching an Arrow review, I think specifically on Dorado, and being blown away at how advanced the mind games and controlling angles and timing.
And then we threw it all out.
And then you throw it all out. And then you go into GOATs meta where it's like, okay, well, we are playing a meta where we just don't care. Like we might clear a high ground, but mostly we're just going to sit on cart and just out sustain. And I think that's what made GOATs originally so broken, is people talk about old economy and things like that, and those were contributing factors to the big busted point, which was you didn't care about map control as GOATs. I mean, in the mirror, of course you matter, but against most any composition, at least at its beginning, GOATs just didn't care. It could out sustain any map advantage that you could have.
Well, it needed to. I mean, it couldn't. The very concept of the comp is such that you can't possibly control things because it was so heavily invested in peel, and
Right,
most of its peel was pretty short range. So they
right,
just went, we will stack all of the peel in the game, and if we spread out, we can't stack that peel. We
right.
lose to dive if we spread out.
Right,
So that's
right,
not going to work
right.
for us.
So it would stack, it'd play for objective, it would play for time, it would play the time game really, and just say, you know what, we might lose a bunch of fights to spamming out or losing map control, but we're going to come back, but we're fast, we're quick, and we have like essentially an ult eco that can't be beat by anything. You know, we're laughing at your Dragon Strike and at your Infrasight and at your Primal Rage. We have a Rally. We have, you know, a Diva Bomb. We have a Graviton. We have, you know, a Sound Barrier. We're not going to lose to anything that you throw to us once we get ult eco, and then it starts to cycle and cycle, and you're never losing a fight.
I mean, mostly there's some ult eco that they could lose to, and we did see people try it. But the problem is you just lose too much of the map when you do it. We
Right.
saw Pharmacy Hanzo for a while to try to battle it. We saw Cyber Dive. We saw
Yep.
some Doomfist armor stuff. And you can win. You can win fights. You can even win matches, but you can't win tournaments. Like
Right,
that.
right.
Like,
It was messy. So we saw goats for a long time, and then I guess goats. I always like talk about, like, this is, I think, a good example of a meta that was counterintuitive to what people wanted to play. So it was not comfortable. One of the few metas where the transition was awkward, but it was a meta that, number one, revolved around abusing a game mechanic, right? Just like the core mechanics of the game. And it was most importantly, or not, maybe not most importantly, but also importantly, revolved around the broken aspects of one hero. Now, you can make arguments that there are other heroes in GOATs that were strong as well. I'm sure Lucio was strong. D.Va was certainly strong. But Rein Zarya, nobody cared about Rein Zarya. Nobody even, like, Zen was relatively strong, but Zen wasn't even part of original GOATs. Now, Moira was stronger than she was now, but nobody played Moira, you know?
you weren't playing Moira GOATs after the first few months.
And, right, exactly. So you're talking about an entire composition that revolved around Brig. And because Brig's sustain anti-dive was so strong, and obviously Rally at that time was, I mean, you could make an argument, was the strongest ultimate in the game.
Make an argument? I'm struggling to think of things that are, support ults generally are better. You know, those support ults that can be used defensively or offensively are almost all top 5 ults, and she probably had the best because permanent armor.
Right, permanent armor and armor at the time that people didn't realize. I don't know how you program a game, but it was broken. It was, what is it, double or triple strength for months and months, like 6 months. Like the added armor was stronger than normal armor. And so you talk about a hero where you just press Q and you literally can't die and you can literally kill anything, and you just press W and there's Brig. And so they exploited the mechanic of, like we talked about, sustaining and surviving and playing on ult eco, and then it revolved around Brig. So I think this is a good example of what we talked about, where sometimes when you look at a meta, you'll see a hero that has 100% pick rate, but you don't nerf the hero. I remember they effectively,
Brig
like,
did not have the highest pick rate, which was the funny thing, because you would see some of the variants replace her, but she was the glue that held it together.
If you saw,
she was much of that.
Exactly. If you saw anything other than goats in the matchup, you'd instantly go Brig. Kind of like what you're saying with Brig's threat preventing dive DPS from being played. Well, Brig's threat prevented anything other than goats being played. And the thing about Brig too is, like, it was frustrating to me watching this, and I'm not a genius developer, and I won't always criticize developer decisions because I think they do a genuinely pretty good job. However, Brig was one of the frustrating aspects for me watching, because at that point I was more involved with coaching and understanding the game. And I see buffs to Reaper, and I see buffs to Mei, and I see buffs to Hanzo, and I see buffs, and I see nerfs to Lucio, and I see nerfs to Zen, and I see nerfs to, who did they else say they nerfed? They nerfed Zarya, I think they nerfed D.Va as well. And I'm like, wait, what are you guys doing? They're not the problem, because like, you have to play. Like,
I think there's politics involved there.
Well,
I think unfortunately there was politics involved there. But go ahead.
So my thought process is, like, you only have so many supports in the game. Like Lucio, Zen, Ana, you can't nerf those guys really, because they're going to be played in other comps as well. So you're nerfing the other comps as well. And the same argument can be applied to Rein, D.Va, and Zarya as well. Like, that's played in dive, that's played in other brawl comps, and instead,
so
you saw
is,
almost like a hesitant.
They did give her some nerfs along the way, but they were always small. They were never some of the things that we've seen in other places where, Genji got dumpstered after he got buffed up. They were never like, hey, this is what changed. We had a game that mostly worked, mostly people understood. This is clearly what changed, but we don't want to, they were never going to delete her. That wasn't a thing
Right.
that they were going to do, but they were very hesitant to quickly take power away from her,
Right.
which was unfortunate in some ways.
Right.
I mean, I
Right.
liked coaching goats, but for the health of the game, for the viewership, for the people continuing to play, probably not the best. But,
No.
we're in,
No.
yeah.
And I think this is also where we hear this catchphrase a lot, and we don't have to get down that rabbit hole, but like I think this is where the first confirmed appearance of what has been best described as power creep really started to kick in, because we see where Blizzard misapplied developer attention is like the key phrase I've written here. And it's like where they see a problem, and instead of saying, okay, Brig is too strong, or we need to kick this 2-2-2 discussion off really seriously, instead we buff DPS and we buff DPS and we buff DPS and we buff DPS and we buff DPS.
Oh,
And then what happens is then we see Brig is, either 2-2-2 is whatever is locked, and now you've got these monster DPS that were never enough to overcome Brig, were never enough to overcome the mechanics of full tanks and full supports, but now it's no longer an option. You've got poor Winston having to deal with Reaper May, and he never had to deal with that before. And you can go down the list of the DPS cast almost like at least as of a year ago. I think 90% of the DPS cast had received significant buffs since their release. Significant.
so I think unfortunately that is just a side effect of the era of game development we're in, where everyone wants to go, hey, we're releasing something new, and the new thing has to be more exciting than the old
True.
stuff. So to be more exciting, it has to be more powerful. You could go to collectible card games where it's like, hey, the new cards are better than the older cards. You could
Yeah.
go to, sort of anything, and you have to do a bit of that. Maybe you don't have to. I would prefer that they didn't, but I understand the
Yes.
ecosystem that the developer feels they're in, because I do not think Brig was the first example of that. I go on and I look at, hey, Anna was the first example of that. If you look at
True.
Anna, and Anna was the first hero released. If you look at what Anna's nade does, it heals, it does damage, it accelerates the healing received, and it what was I trying to say? And it prevents healing from happening. That's 4 different things that we've pumped into one ability.
True.
What ability of Reaper does 4 different things?
Mm-hmm.
What ability of Reinhardt does 4 different? You
True.
see where I'm
True.
saying? Where it was like we
I see
had
what you're
that really
saying.
from the very beginning, and I think it's just it was super obvious with Brig, but that's because Brig was clearly
Right.
released as a hey, supports are not having fun. We've been in Dive for 9+ months, etc. And Dive, even though Dive at a pro level had sort of evolved to a we're going to punish the tanks, not the supports, that hadn't trickled all the way down the ladder. So dives were still happening on support. Supports weren't having fun. Blizzard felt they had to do something, and that's why we got very self-peel heavy
True.
supports in Moira, in Brig, etc.
That makes sense. Now, I will say one thing, just on a side note. I think that a lot of times we scapegoat new heroes as being a problem, and I agree that Nade and Ana, I'm sure, was like crazy at the time. But like, you also have to look at the heroes that you like, the early developer heroes, like Reaper. We look at Ryan, we look at Bastion, we look at Junkrat, we look at Symmetra. Especially on their release, their abilities were just boring. Soldier as well. Just boring.
Sure.
They didn't do anything. So it's like you have to find the balance, I think, of making abilities that are jack of all trades, do too much, completely busted, but also abilities that actually take some thought to use. Because when I had my whole collaboration with SVB and we talked about skill floor, there were a lot of the early first release heroes that were very low in the skill floor, like way more. And I think
Absolutely.
that's an interesting side effect. I don't know if it was just, hey, that we have to keep this game simple, to get people involved. But since then, we've seen abilities that are arguably stronger, but also have more complexity behind them. So it's like a good and a bad thing, I guess. So like, what is the, so like, I guess the next logical step for goats was, we see some additional nerfs, and I think we can bring this up simultaneously. We see DPS. Like the Shengdu hunters. Everybody thinks of Shengdu the hunters, and then we see Sombra goats. And do you want to talk about those like too?
So Sombra goats. Okay, I mean we can talk about Sombra goats. Sombra goats happened where we could stick the Sombra in there. Sombra goats had some nice stuff where hey, EMP is also one of the most powerful ults in the game, and we can get a lot of value out of having our Sombra, etc. I think we both know that ultimately it proved not to be the king of goats, but we definitely did see it for a while. I think some of that was honestly just frustration of hey, we want to do something that isn't goats, and some of that was teams feeling like we're so so far behind, goats lasted so long and went so deep
Yep.
that teams were trying to find a way to cheat, a shortcut.
Yep.
Like, no, I want to change the game. I want the game to be different. I want to make you play a different game because you, San Francisco Shock, you, Eagle Gaming, you, whatever, are just too far ahead.
Right.
So we're going to try to, rather than catch up on that ladder because you are 2 ladders ahead of me, let me try and build a different ladder. And it didn't work, but I understand totally why teams did it.
Right. And it worked to an extent for the teams that, like, I mean, nobody won Overwatch League with Sombra Goats necessarily, but like we still saw, you know, I mean, what is it? Shanghai beat San Francisco Shock on a stage with Sombra Goats. I think San Francisco Shock didn't play it super well, but you know, there was an idea, and ironically, like, I guess we could touch on this really quickly as well. We're kind of overloading ourselves with categories, but a lot of the time, the Sombra Goats almost forced teams that didn't know how to play goats into the proper playstyle of goats. In other words, map control, angles, playing it slow. A lot of these teams are in the mindset, and it's always like this a lot of times, especially with brawl metas on first release. Just press mouse 1, guys, W, all together, come on, like, right? But as teams get better, they understand, like, you can't force a kill on the Ryan. He's going to S-key out with speed, and the D.Va's going to screw your backline, and Zarya's going to be a million charge, and they're going to build better ults and put more pressure, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody in my chat understands the value of angles, and that was no less valuable with a brawl comp. It's just as valuable as it was with the spam comp. So when you involve the Sombra on an angle, you're like, hey, this is pretty good. We have to play slow for EMP. We have to play slow for hacks. And it kind of forces you to play in the way that you should have been playing if you were playing goats properly. What are your thoughts on that?
Into the mirror, yes. I think into the mirror, that's true. And I think it was hard for teams that weren't really good at goats to understand, oh, shoot, how do we deal with this angle, et cetera,
Right.
because people were not understanding, hey, you need someone threatening another angle. Like, you need to have a D.Va up threatening another angle, or a Zarya threatening another angle, or you need to set it up so that you have a concave that they're pressing into, et cetera, because people had been thinking of it as, we're our blobs behind our Rhine shields that we push into each other.
Right.
Again, that's the right answer against poke, because you need the extreme peel. That's the right answer against dive, because you need the extreme peel. But goats doesn't have the mobility to get on top of your lone heroes. So you actually want to go, if you get on top of my lone heroes, I can shoot you in the back.
Right, exactly. And we kind of saw the development of that is when people figured out how to play DPS into goats. And obviously, again, that was even worse than Sombra Goats, arguably. I know it's a popular thing on Reddit that, oh yeah, Goats was on the way out before 222. It really wasn't. Some teams were finding success with it, but it all would revolve around
one team found success for, you know, one tournament.
Right,
okay,
exactly. But one DPS really rose to the forefront, or 2 DPS really. Sombra, the one that can play wherever she wants. And Pharmacy, who also can play wherever she wants. What are your thoughts on that? Like, and how that contributed to Goats struggling a little bit?
Focus, don't lose focus.
Yeah, no,
Keep
I mean, I think you pretty much hit it. Sombra had some ability, some success to play where she wanted. Hey, she can teleport out, etc. I mean, Goats teams did get good at going, okay, well, we still do have extreme peel. We can block off your Goats team while we force your Sombra out and then run you over. Like, Goats teams did figure that out, etc. When we're talking about Sombra Goats, when we're talking about the other stuff, she did do a good job because, hey, she could exist, etc. And that worked pretty well. That's always what it was about. But it was hardly the first time teams had been trying that. I mean, we've been seeing Pharah Hanzo comps, for example, for ages that had been trying to crack open Goats because those were 2 of the most extreme sources of damage before we buffed everyone's damage through the roof. And, you know, it just didn't work. And they were holding angles. They were holding high ground. They were doing all of it. And it just wasn't enough. I think what ultimately happened there is, yes, we got the fair, and that was a big deal. And I actually think, you know, the breakthrough that happened for the other comp was, hey, we can actually, at a high enough skill level, so, you know, near the top of the Overwatch League, we could actually get enough value out of our Widowmaker's damage to make this work. So it was like, hey, that was the change, the more consistent one-shots, because that was ultimately the team that did the most run for the money in stage 3 there, where it was like, hey, we're running Pharah plus Widowmaker, and then we'll mix in a Doom and Orisa, maybe a Hog instead of the Doom, etc.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then I guess 2-2-2 hits, and everybody breathes a sigh of relief. And you know, what was it? Was that right when Ice Fishing came out?
Yeah, so it happened, and I like to think that because Phase 2 had been showing Reaper and memeing on some teams before 222 got released, everyone went, Reaper's right here to play. I'm kidding. Okay.
I mean, yeah. I mean, listen, Paris second, we were giving people like Vietnam flashbacks trying to attack into our Paris second. Gee,
yeah.
That was fun.
Okay. So it was. So ice fishing came at the same time. We had goats nerfed, and that immediately went, okay, well, what do we do? Well, of course, we're going to run Diva because everyone always runs Diva. Yeah, that's going to make sense. We're going to run Hanzo because Hanzo never really got nerfed from his strength
No.
before we found goats
Yeah.
of this. Hey, you got Storm Arrow, you got your little fluffy leap.
Right.
He'd been one of the best DPS in the
I
game
mean,
before goats. Might as
he-
well go right back to it.
Right. He was like
Right.
one of the heroes. Like he was just awful against ghosts because even though he had the high damage, he was very easy to rush. He was very easy to zone. He was relatively mobile, but not near as mobile as something like a Sombra, a Pharmacy, or even a Soldier. And unlike Widow, he couldn't just sit a trillion miles away and just ping, ping, ping. And his ultimate was worthless against ghosts, almost completely. Like very, very hard to get value out of that. So, now that that was gone, you see him back. And then what else did we see here? With like I can't remember that. Was it Orisa?
Yeah, so ice fishing would happen with the Orisa Hog Hanzo Mei. That was what ended up getting run for the ice fishing. And then at the same time, I'd say the more dominant meta, while that was a comp that saw play on some maps, etc., the more dominant meta at that time was the Reaper Mei Orisa Diva.
Right.
So Orisa was the prime tank that was being run, etc., in this era. And honestly, I don't remember if Orisa had received buffs going in. Or if Rein had received nerfs at the same patch that brought us 222. I don't remember quite what led us to that. I suspect it was just a case of, hey, we need to maintain some level of poke if we're running Reaper Mei, etc. But I could be wrong.
I do also remember that like the entire meta revolved around that pole as well. So
for ice fishing, yes. I'd say it's debatable. I'd fight you a little more on that with the Reaper Mei comp.
Right.
But,
well, no, I agree with that. I think with the Reaper Mei comp, it was more along the lines of, I'm gonna be dead instantly against this comp.
Right.
Like you're gonna struggle a lot more.
The defensive.
Right.
Yes. It was very much, hey, and we found this out. It's, hey, we found this out before other teams, which led to the success of, hey, use our tank cooldowns to force DPS cooldowns, and then we win because it was everyone had an invulnerability cooldown.
Right. So you look at this and you're like, okay, there's a more spam version of like the Orisa Diva comp, and there's a more brawl version of the Orisa Diva comp. Why Reaper Mei? Why? Like, obviously, we talked about how Orisa was relatively strong here, but like, was it just? Do you think that this meta was really truly one of a strong meta at the time, or do you think something like a poke your comp or a dive your comp at the time would have done okay into?
No, I think a poke comp might have been the right answer at the time, to be perfectly honest. I think good angle control, a poke comp, I think you could have run that very effectively with like, hey, we're going to do this, etc. But I think this is where we hit the stickiness of, hey, people knew how to play brawl, people knew how to do that thing, and being able to go, hey, we have this Reaper Mei thing is going to be it. And even when people are running ice fishing, they weren't taking aggressive angles with it. Ice fishing was sort of like a crossbow type thing. It wasn't, hey, let's have our Hog in one place and our Hanzo in another and our Zen Orisa on a third sight line. It was, nope, we've mostly got our Hanzo shooting through our Orisa shield, and okay, now we hit the hook wall so that they can't get him back, etc.
You know what? Actually, now that you mention that, I remember at that time, that was when I was trialing with a couple of, like, just kind of shopping, right? And man, everybody did play that thing stacked up. Like, I mean, just one giant clump. And, I look at these heroes like Mercy and Hanzo and Hog, and I'm like, there's no way that you play the... Yeah, and that's how it was.
You'd see the very occasional exception. Like, I remember during that meta attacking into Volskaya first, or maybe we were defending Volskaya first, and it's like, oh, we're actually just going to defend with double snipers.
Right.
Yay! Because it was impossible to break. It's like, you can't do that with the Mei Reaper comp or the Hanzo ice fishing comp.
Right,
like, neither would work. But anyways.
Right. So, when you look at, like, Poke beating this Orisa Diva Reaper Mei Morilusu, I think... I don't know if nobody tried or it just was unsuccessful. People were still in that brawlier mindset. And I think what eventually happened is you looked at the Orisa Diva Reaper Mei, and two things happened. Number one, people looked at it and were like, okay, is Mei really all that useful? Because you have a hero that can, Orisa, who fortified, doesn't give a rip about walls, he doesn't give a rip about freeze. Diva, who's going to eat your ult, and who is not going to get frozen. Reaper, who can shift. Moira, who can shift. Lucio, who's never going to get frozen. So you look at Mei and like, hey, this is pretty good at taking space, but she doesn't do a whole lot. And I think that's where we started to see what I call the meta-specific pick, like the Zenyatta and Goats, where Doom is not good against anything other than that comp, but against that comp, his own comp, he was good. And then along
Yep.
similar lines, you look at D.Va. Well, she doesn't do a whole lot. If there's no Mei ult to eat, she's not going to do a whole lot. And even something like eating Reaper ult wasn't as valuable because you had a bunch of heroes that weren't really scared of Reaper ult. And obviously at this point in time, we're talking about another very infamous hero at Overwatch's release, which was Sigma.
Yep.
So I know this is kind of when we started to kind of go our separate ways, but what were your thoughts on this meta's dominance, this meta's legitimacy?
So I'm going to have to lean on you here more than I'd like, because I was gone at this point. After the Reaper Mei meta, I stuck around. I looked for, hey, Overwatch League, etc. I did some stuff and I looked at contenders and I could see the format change. And my take at the time was, it's clear to me with a little bit of insider knowledge that the money isn't where it needed to be for this space to grow, etc. So I actually took off and,
Right.
focused on other work, other things, etc. So I've gone back and seen a little bit of this stuff, but I have not dedicated the time that I would like to be like, okay, during my gap year, we'll call it, I understand everything that happened.
Sure.
And that's not me, and I don't think that's necessary either. So I'm going to have to
No.
lean on you a little
Sure.
harder here.
Go ahead.
But it makes sense as an evolution that we go, okay, if we're not running the Mei, because the Mei was really just giving us initiation and an ability to survive herself with her, ice block, etc. We go ahead and get the Doomfist. That works well. Doomfist has problems into lots of other comps, particularly if Tracer exists. But then, okay, once the Doomfist is in play, the D.Va makes less sense. Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. And then we get to Sigma. So go ahead.
Right. And I think Sigma's release was like the first of, I think people were playing him. I mean, I know I read him wrong initially. This was before I feel like I fully understood Overwatch. And, we see shield stacking. Everybody's mostly stacking. And it was literally very similar to ice fishing in the fact that how most teams played it, it was really just a cycle of cooldowns and hope something good happens. You pull punch, you pull TP, you go in with your, pull rocket, and you hope something happens. You hope you get a pick, you make a favorable cooldown trade. And then I think some of the better teams were starting to realize, hey, if we stage our Doomfist a little better, he doesn't have to pull punch. He can go pull slam, which is even better. You can utilize Sigma's off angle to put more consistent pressure out and put basically more damage out. You can utilize your Lucio to force cooldowns. And essentially, like, over time, it started to evolve a little bit. People started realizing the power of Reaper flanks and TPs and lurking positions, et cetera, et cetera. And it became very much a who's going to cycle better, right? But also who's going to actually start to control the map better. Because I think you look at this comp, and certainly more so than when it was just D.Va, as soon as Sigma started to be released, even if this wasn't a tried and true, this definitely will lose to poke, Sigma shut down a lot of the poke options. Because while D.Va definitely provides better answers against things like a pharmacy, more spammier comps that aren't pharmacy, I think Sigma shut down, at least at release, pretty hard. Like, what was it, 1400 or 1500 shield? I
thought that was okay.
Yeah, but... I mean, it was just unbelievable, his ability to just control space against anything and everything. And so you run a comp that's the only composition that could really threaten him at the time, which was something that can punch him, something that can shoot him, And I think this was a meta that was like maybe not the best at the time, but made sense given the circumstances, because this is, I think, another thing to keep in mind why Reinhardt might not have been played is this was before some of his HP buffs. This was before of his speed buff with taking shield. In other words, pressing W with shield. And most recently, at least with the Doomfist punch and boop, this is before his steadfast buff as well. So he could be booped, displaced very, very easily. So I don't know. I look at this meta and I look at it and like, maybe there was something better, but it made sense, especially with, like you were mentioning, the stickiness of the previous GOATS meta, that this would be the brawl that people would go to. Orisa strong, Sig strong, Reaper was very strong, Doomfist maybe not so much, but he was very good in the mirror. Moira was relatively strong, Lucio was still relatively strong, and there you go. I would be hard pressed to think of heroes that were stronger at the time than Orisa, Sigma, and Reaper.
Unless you do a complete shift. And again, that complete shift becomes, we're starting over, we're pulling out what we think are the most valuable heroes because, you've picked out, hey, we think it's Sigma, hey, we think it's this, and we're using these as a support line. Unless you make a hard shift, but again, that stickiness doesn't really allow for that because you're prepping for your tournament next month. You're prepping for your tournament in 2 weeks, etc.
Now, one thing I will bring up, and this is something that I have basically no experience with this one at all, because this is when I was not coaching, we were on an off season. Bastion. for a very brief period of time, showed up, even in Overwatch League. And I don't know if... I honestly couldn't tell you why. I understand Bastion in Goats, because Bastion was like the only DPS. If you could support him on a certain map, you could technically burn through Goats resources that other DPS couldn't do. But I don't understand Bastion's place here. Do you have any insight here or any guess? Because I'm
afraid I don't. I mean, I could make a guess, but I'd just be making a fool of myself putting my foot in the mouth, because I wasn't watching much Overwatch League. I really wasn't during that off year. So like I've gone back and looked at some stuff, but what you're talking about was not a long stretch, and I'm pretty confident that I can tear it apart if I wanted to. Like, no one's running it, but I'm pretty sure if I needed to teach a team how to do it, I could beat it. Which maybe I'm wrong, maybe.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was just another symptom of, hey, Brawl heroes are still kind of strong here. Sigma's got too much shield resource, Orisa had Fortify or her HP or whatever was too strong shield. So you're again playing a hero that's trying to bust the Brawl. If you're going to play spam, people said you had to play basically Pharah or Bastion. Or something along those lines.
No, I mean, it's, hey, double shield. What can try to beat that? And let's go to the same answers that we tried to beat Goats with.
Okay, so then I'm fairly certain that we saw the return of Rein. And this was a meta that actually that sat around for a long time, had a lot of iterations. And I think I'll have a lot of insight in this one, because I spent a lot of time coaching this one and not coaching it particularly well. I'd be open to admit. I think we solved it, but we solved it too late. But I think we can talk a lot about it, because this is a comp that was largely basically the first, like, people kind of started to remember that mirrors are slower spam, but also that there was still the options for teams that were good at it to just W key if they could do it the right way. So what we saw a lot of was Rein. We saw a lot of D.Va, some Zarya, but very, very little Zarya. Mei came back. Kree/Reaper, and this is situational. Okay. I mean, you could probably guess which one started to dominate as teams got better at going slow. And then Ana, Lucio, Brig, some Moira, but very rarely did you see Moira.
What brought Mei in? Like, I'm not like shocked, but I'm a little surprised that you're seeing. Go ahead.
Pretty clear what brought Mei in, at least to me, and it's because this is right when I believe they hit Orisa and Sigma pretty hard. They had nerfed Orisa and they had nerfed Sigma. And I think Orisa was hit a little harder. So if you wanted to continue to play Brawl, Orisa Sigma made a lot less sense. So when you bring Rein back, and I think maybe this is when Rein's speed buff came back. You guys you'll have to help me out with this, because I don't remember I'm trying to like line up the patch.
It's a long history for us to remember. A long history
of patch notes here. I can remember the metas, but I don't remember the patch notes that lined up with it. And Rein was probably more viable. And whenever you see Rein in Brawl, you're going to see Mei, because she's the hero that enables him to go swing on the enemy Rein, but she also screws him over a lot too. Like, Mei is a doom pick for Rein, like he hates that. So you pick Rein, you're obviously going to go D.Va, because D.Va's going to deny the enemy Mei the most. And Zarya just dies to Mei instantly. And then teams would initially go like the Reaper Lucio, because just, hey, rush. Rush. But as people started to slow things down a little bit, at least a lot of teams did, the Kree off angle, the Kree flank, the Kree spam was more valuable.
Sure.
Now this is where things get really interesting. Is teams would play on a Lucio, some teams would play on a Brig on some maps where there wasn't a lot of movement. Which that one never really caught on as much. That was very, like, we saw it every now and then, but very rarely. But there were some teams, most infamously, Third Impact and North American Contenders, who ran Lucio Brig, and I mean that's all they ran.
I would hate to be a tank in that scenario, but okay.
So they ran it to such efficiency that they were literally spawn camping Overwatch League teams for months.
Very good.
So this is probably one of the most dominant teams and contenders, like up there with Eagle Gaming for a long period of time. I still have Vietnam flashbacks from scrimming them, and basically I think like the way they looked at it is we are just so decisive and so fast with our core that we will always beat you with just raw teamwork. But the other thing about Third Impact as well, the way they did things, is they would have so much aggression and discipline from their core that the McCree, who was Tayo, who's with the San Francisco Shock now, legitimately was playing like he was playing Smurfing in bronze. He would be in your spawn. He would be hard flanking across the map, and it was a very much darned if you do, darned if you don't. Either you deal with Tayo, who's literally behind you, or you deal with the Lusu, Ryan Brig that are up in your throat, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's something we didn't go into much in GOATS. We talked a lot about, hey, it evolves to take angles, etc. But some of those earlier iterations were very much about who can decisively do things together. Like the beginning of those first steps on the ladder were very much that. So if a team is understanding this is decisively how we do things, we know our strats, we're going to implement our strats, we're all on the same page. Like we really are all on the same page. That's always got a lot of power.
Right, exactly. And another thing that was powerful about it is if you did win first fight, then you have rally and beat, which at the time had a lot more impact than Nano. Nano was easier to deal with. So
is there a time when that's not been true? I'm trying to think. Like
Nanoblade's always good, or always has a threat, but that's about it.
Okay.
But I think this comp like fundamentally should have been played in a way that was more slow, that was more supporting. We saw for like a little bit of Overwatch League, the Florida Mayhem were very famous at the time for literally running Brig Kree as a two-man duo that would go on flanks together. Right. And you can question about like the viability. That was like the on a Brig variant, right? And essentially most teams that were good at it would play very slow. They would play split. They would play, Diva on an off angle, support the McCree. Your Ryan goes in and makes maybe trades off of your Mei wall, but nothing committal.
Right.
Whereas teams that were trying to force the hard committal stuff and weren't performing at the third impact did poorly.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the, hey, this is maybe the simpler implementation, but you really have to do the simpler implementation perfectly for it to work. Right. Yeah, I hear you.
Right. So it was an interesting composition. Ultimately, I think people got really tired of Mei. People got really tired of Reaper. So those heroes I do distinctly remember being nerfed. They were tired of seeing it. And, once I think at that point Mei had been nerfed, I think we saw Tracer being buffed again. And I'm trying to remember, chat. You'll have to help me out. I think this is when we started to see, what did we start to see? Now you weren't around here. I want to say this is when we started to see some Brig Zen start to pop up with like Sombra Tracer or Soldier Tracer.
Sure.
I think this had some meta stuff. Hang on, somebody in my chat has linked me something, so I'm gonna check this out really fast.
Oh, someone's got a meta history flowchart for us or something.
Yeah. Maybe
link it to me so I can. Okay, well, if it's good,
I assume it will be all right.
Okay, that's fine.
Let's see here. February 16. All right. It looks interesting. Let me send it to you over Discord.
Yeah, let's do it. Send it to me so I can show my people, which is probably more interesting than the roster of heroes that they've been looking at. Let's open original. Perfect. Okay. Oh yeah, I think I remember seeing this ages ago. Okay. And we've been doing it with sort of everyone's role rather than just saying what the meta is. This is interesting. Okay, let's take a look here.
All right, so I'll let you guys look at it as well. Yeah, this isn't super helpful.
No, I would have liked a little bit more of a, I see it, but I'd like a little bit more of a summary, like where we have our tournament names. I'd have liked we sort of have it. We have on the far right Double Shield, Mei McCree, but completed out of chaos. That's only okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it's there. It's something, but I think we've already mostly moved past where it would have been valuable.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is that like at this point in time, we've seen Brawl starts to fall out of favor a little bit. And I distinctly remember directly before Brawl, I cannot forget this.
Yeah.
Sandwiched between Reaper Doom and the Mei McCree, we had a very infamous meta, which is like Double Shield. And people call Double Shield Reaper Doom, et cetera, et cetera. But when people say Double Shield, usually what they mean is the Hanzo Mei. And this is the first iteration we saw of Orisa Sig basically upgraded ice fishing. And
Yep.
what I guess made Hanzo Mei iconic for me anyway, this was with Bap Zen, is that it was the first time, at least, that across the board, not just Overwatch League, but contenders teams as well, everybody was thinking about map control. Everybody.
Excellent.
So we had gotten to a point where people had stopped thinking, oh, we group up as a team, we rush in, that's just how you play the game of Overwatch. And now we have people understanding that Orisa Sigma split, right? Your Hanzo Mei split. Your Bap Zen sometimes split. And the whole concept was, at least for any team that wasn't complete trash, was, you know, your Sigma controls an off angle with Hanzo or Mei support or Bap support, Zen support, etc. And you play around controlling space. And you win or lose based off of that. You don't win or lose.
I mean,
and that was the big
I don't
deal.
think that's the first time we've understood that. I think back when we played, you know, we had a very long variation of dive metas, and people did understand that the dive, once you hit the dive, it's a foregone conclusion you're going to win if you've won your staging battle.
That's
so I don't
true.
think it's the first time in Overwatch we got to that. I just think it's a, hey, this isn't just a dive thing. This is the game.
Right. And if it was an issue in GOATS, I think a lot of teams forgot it. Because it felt like with GOATS, a lot of teams kind of got baited into the brawl mindset of, like you were saying, like, oh, this only applies to dives, doesn't apply. Well, no. Now it applies to Overwatch. And we're coming up on a meta where that actually applied to dive as well. People kind of figured that out. So basically the concept, now you were basically gone at this point, correct?
Yeah, I was basically gone until you know, we saw our hybrid, we saw the Gauntlet, etc. there. So
right,
I'm still relatively recent.
Okay.
Yes.
So basically what this meta was about, like we talked about the splits and the pressure, and it was heavy spam. And the reason why this comp worked is because you've got all these teams that are very set in the brawl mindset. But Orisa's still strong, Sigma's still strong, both spam friendly heroes. Hanzo's still strong. Bap is a relatively new hero who puts out a lot of damage. Zen hasn't been touched too much. And Mei was essentially the pick of like, hey, we don't know what else is better, and this hero is pretty annoying to play Brawl into because we can slow you down.
Right.
And the other thing with Mei as well is like, she helped a lot. And if your Sigma is fighting my Sigma for the off angle and my Sigma has a Mei wall, you better be careful.
Right.
That was kind of the idea.
I mean, Mei is doing a real good job of going, hey, we're a poke comp, but we're going to keep you honest if you try to run Brawl at us. I'm getting it.
I do have a question in chat, which I think if you want to talk on briefly. Was Clockwork Vendetta ever meta, or was it just a niche strategy? I have my opinion on this, but I want yours.
I don't think Clockwork Vendetta ever fits what we generally think of as meta, simply because what we talk about here is... how do I phrase this? I don't think I'd ever call them meta, because what we run into is they're not taking up enough of what's sort of going on. If we're talking about what I'm thinking about, we're talking about back when Clockwork Vendetta was running, back when we were coaching together. Yes, we're not talking about that as some later comp.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it ever really was, because I look at that and go, hey, it happened, but it's not, unless you're playing in their specific region against them, it was never a common enough thing that it was really factoring into how you do it. Like, again, you can look at any game and sort of be like, hey, this is it, blah, blah. If everyone's playing Clockwork Vendetta, what you want to come out the gate with is different than if everyone is playing GOATS, or if everyone is playing, you know, Protect the McCree, or whatever the case is going to be. Like, you look at that and go, hey, it's not really a factor. Like, it's a factor in that it exists, but it existing on 2% of what's being played is way different than it existing on 60% of what's being played for its impact on the meta, quote unquote. The meta is, again, sort of the outside the game, what are people playing, etc. Well, that has much to do with it. So I'd say no, but what's your opinion?
I agree. I think it was a meta that was designed to counter GOATs, you know, by a bunch of people that were good at those individual heroes, and for the most part, it did its job. You know, you've got heavy spam from Torb, Mei, who already discussed, slows down things a lot. Hog, who he found a way to make it work, and obviously Orisa at the time, he was very strong. So I think it was a composition that could beat GOATs. I don't think it would have beaten. Like, everybody says, oh, well, if GOATs is properly played, it could have beaten everything. I mean, that's just true. The reason why it worked is because they were just so much better than their counterparts. I think one thing I will give credit to Clockwork Vendetta for is that it did permanently shift people's opinions, along with, if I flatter myself, a little bit of what Phase 2 did. I think it started giving people more open to the fact that Orisa as a hero was still very good.
I think that's true. I think you are there. I think the one advantage that Phase Two's wacky strategies, Clockwork Vendetta, and also, our team in Overwatch League also had as advantages was, hey, there is something to be said for, I find something that's almost as good, but I get to practice against the same thing with
Exactly.
100% of my practice time, and you don't get to practice
Exactly.
against me ever. So if I can quickly get to a level where I'm competitive with you, it's tough.
Right. There's
Yeah.
no carryover. You don't. Oh, guys, we're playing against. I remember us scrimmaging Phase One, who was playing a lot of that stuff, and it was always like, man, we're never gonna play against this. Why are we scrimming this? And that was very much the dilemma that you're talking about. These teams are putting yourself in. If you're Clockwork Vendetta and you're playing against Goats 4-7, excuse me, that's great. But if you're a Goats team, where are you gonna find another Clockwork Vendetta?
Well,
Right.
we saw a little bit of that with Sydney Drop Bears even because we were in a goats meta, but we had a strong DPS team in our region, and it was like, okay, this is
Yeah.
annoying because we look at this and go, we have to dedicate enough practice time to make sure we can beat this,
Yes.
but they only have to practice against this. Now
Yep.
our comp was stronger, so it worked out, but it was, it's a bit of a devil's trade that you get
It
stuck in
is.
there.
It is. It is. Um, so there, I guess that kind of addresses that question. Double Shield, we talked about it. It was good. It was fine. Did well. Ultimately, once Orisa, I think Sigma were nerfed a little bit. We saw, believe Hanzo was nerfed a little bit, and I think BAP was also nerfed a little bit because this is when Lamp was a little stronger than it was.
Hmm.
I think we saw it regress a little bit. Then we see the McCree kind of come back in, and ultimately after that, I'm doing my best to remember. I believe we had a brief period of time where maybe Double Shield comes back. I want to say that before that, though, we had a meta that was very much Brig Zen, Soldier, Tracer, or Sombra. So it's like either Tracer, Sombra / Soldier. And then I want to say it was either Ball or Sig or like Ball Diva or something like that. Or maybe it was Winston. Either way, like I want to take a point in time. Like there was definitely a Brig plus support plus Tracer comp.
I want to hear more about this
Okay,
because I want to hear what's making Soldier work in this situation.
now,
Like I understand the angles, but
yeah,
there's other heroes that do.
Soldier.
Go ahead.
Soldier was essentially just, hey, we're playing a relatively mobile comp, and this hero can do pretty well
Mhm.
with Brig Armor Pack / Arm, and the Orb and can take angles. That was basically it. I think Soldier was definitely replaceable and did not last long. What I want to bring more attention to is that the Brig Zen composition, but not just the Brig Zen. We saw Brig with Ana. We saw Brig with Mercy. There was a very popular comp in Europe at this time, run by what was Obey Alliance, what is now Raspberry Racers again, and what was Raspberry Racers back then again. So they were Raspberry Racers, then they were Obey Alliance, now they're Raspberry Racers. Anyway, and it was running Koth, and it was essentially Pharmacy Tracer, and you ran it with a Brig.
Sure.
And your tanks basically played, I think it was with a ball, you played very passive, very slow, very cautious, and it was the first time where, not the first time, but it was certainly the first time where more attention had been brought to, hey, Brig is busted at pocketing these heroes.
Absolutely, because you're telling me this composition, and it hurts me so much because I think of the original Pharmacy Tracer dive, where the struggle was always what support do you run since your Mercy's up there, etc., to make the rest of your team work at all and not just get crushed. And your answer now is, of course, Brig, because you go, well, you can't catch us and dive us, because I'm thinking,
Right.
what tanks are you running with that, etc. But no, Brig is just breaking
Right.
it.
So
and she's still broken. But
right.
anyway,
So it was essentially
tangent.
people like that point in time is like, at least in the European and North America region, and contenders, is that we were like, holy cow, this hero, you overpack a Tracer, she's 225 or whatever, 225 HP with armor.
Mm-hmm.
And you can pocket your Pharah, you can pocket anything. And a lot of the metas that followed that, and we'll talk about Double Shield's resurgence with this as well, kind of revolved around that concept. Even if I don't remember specifically everything about it, it was Brig pocketing DPS. And it was very much tanks learning how to play more disciplined. Ball starts to be picked more often because, hey, Ball doesn't need a lot of healing. We can pocket our DPS and not feel bad about, quote unquote, wasting armor packs. And more than anything, the resurgence of reappearance of Brig and the reappearance of mobile DPS
Right.
Whereas
Wasting armor packs is an interesting word for giving a flanker a double
right,
strength harmony armor.
right,
But,
right,
you know.
exactly. But you get the idea, and we see pharmacies coming back again. Sombra's coming back again, Tracer's coming back, and even a little bit of soldiers coming back again. And all of this because with the armor pack, this hero just isn't squishy anymore. They can stay in the angle a lot longer. They can stay in that aggressive position, and so over time,
but you've got
right. Go ahead.
the irony, of course, is what originally took down dive is re-enabling the dive heroes, but they still have to deal with that hero on the other team. But go ahead.
So ironically, is like the dive was bad because you still had to deal with Brig, but the signature dive playstyle of fighting for space way off on sides of the map was stronger than ever, because that was basically, it was just Briggs pocketing their DPS and hoping that they would win. And so I think, like, whether it was Briggs Zen or Brig Mercy or whatever, like this is what you saw on Koth, this is what you saw on certain maps, and eventually I believe we see Mei nerfs here, we saw Reaper nerfs, so that Brawl comp is having a harder time sustaining against pocketed DPS. And this is also when we start to see Ashe more often as well, who had been considered underpowered for a long time, had recently received buffs to fire rate, to ammo, etc., and is now, hey, I'm really strong, y'all better watch out, and now we have Ashe again. So, whether it was introduction of Ball, the buffs to Ashe, Brig being able to pocket DPS, I think at this point in time, Tracer also received her fall off buff. In other words, where she didn't deal with fall off for another extra 3 meters.
I don't think. Oh, did she get another one? I remember a long time ago when. Wow. Yeah. So they just insisted on. So it was like
13, 14 meters. Yeah, they reverted it about a month ago. But yeah,
I saw the reversion, but I was thinking even. When Pulse Bomb went down, when Pulse Bomb decreased and stopped being a tank buster, they originally gave her a bit of a range buff. So this was a second one.
Fairly certain they gave her a second one because she sees a resurgence. So anyway, she's back, and basically pocketed DPS are back, and this is when we start to see heroes that are self-sufficient, map control, dive, hybrids, etc. Now, this is right when another infamous comp comes in the door, and this is someone that you're going to be a little bit more familiar with. And this is Orisa Sigma. They come back. Yep. They're badder than ever. They're grumpy from all the nerfs. You know what I'm saying? But what they're enabled by now is the fact that, hey, we can enable, map control. We can enable map control and still deny your dive, because instead of running with BAP Zen, we're going to run it with BAP Brig. And that prevents you from saying, hey, we're just going to play, dive into these guys. They've got squishy backline. We can just, armor pack or Tracer, and she'll farm that BAP Zen. We're going to play BAP Brig. We're going to play BAP Brig, and we're going to play it with, Genji. We're going to play it with Ashe. We're going to play it with Tracer. And this is right when Echo was released as well. I know in Overwatch League, there were a lot of teams that were trying to force BAP Zen with Tracer. Or BAP Zen. Like, they were basically trying to go back to double shield spam again. And there were Tracers like Prophet that were just laughing at their foolishness. Because your BAP Zen can't do anything. I remember that was one of the big reviews I did over early last summer, was like, look at how much the work this Tracer's getting done. If you're not running a Brig, your Zen is legit AFK, looking for a Tracer. So, we started to see, we saw a little bit of Hanzo, not as much, but like mostly Ashe, Tracer, and Echo. And a big one was the Genji, the resurgence of Genji, who at that time had also received some significant buffs to fire rate, damage, deflect, cancel, etc.
That certainly hit my radar.
So, what are your thoughts on this composition? I guess before I kind of teal.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're seeing what we've sort of seen a movement away from dive. The original dive did one thing really well, where it's like, hey, we play dive. Dive is the play style. We play for a map control. We use a lot of mobility, and we sync everyone up using this mobility really well to do it. Goats, we're really leaning hard into our brawl, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we're moving towards is what we're continuing to see, where everything has to be able to, if we think of it sort of as a 3-way triangle, everything has to be sort of occupying 2 different spots. And what you're getting into there is you're going really poke heavy, but you have to drop a Briggs in it. You have to have Briggs in it, even though she does nothing for poke. You have to have her in it, etc. And I think we've been moving in that, where people are getting more of this understanding of, hey, there's sort of 3 different styles, but these days you've got to occupy two of them.
Right. In other words, the rise of the hybrids, really, because it's the ability to counter the straight up brawl, the straight up spam, the straight up dive is just one swap away. Okay, and I think this is a point in time where we see again the fight for map control, the fight for space. A pocketed tracer can do a lot more spam, prevent your Zen from spamming at all. A pocketed Genji can ruin your entire team's life. Doesn't matter how much damage that you have. He just jumps over the wall, he dashes through you, and then you're completely ruined. And I think we started to see a kind of an interesting hybrid here. So this is an interesting one. So teams played this one very similar to ice fishing. I don't know what it is about Orisa Sigma where teams, I think it's the cooldown of shield and hull. It was a cycling of cooldowns, a cycling of cooldowns, a cycling of cooldowns. And some teams played more split and some teams played more stacked. And the reason for that is we saw it was interesting enough, almost more of a brawl spam hybrid than it was a dive spam hybrid. Because a lot of teams would force, do a halt cooldown, Sigma peeks for a rock or whatever, and Tracer goes for a blink, whatever, and you throw some shots at it, whatever, and you go, oh wow, we force fortify and we force lamp. I want to punish that now, and you'd have the Sigma stacked more the Orisa, shift in or shield in, and the Orisa just goes in. Bat Brig, they just walk into the enemy team, and they throw lamp in there, and we'd see cooldown trades. Basically, you get a cooldown advantage, and you'd want to push that cooldown advantage. Now, the interesting thing was you always enjoy pushing advantages from angles, not just W keying in, getting concaved. But the reasoning why some teams, and I know we did some of this over at Uprising, is we'd off-angle DPS, always off-angle DPS, but Sigma would sometimes stack to enable his Orisa to push the next advantage.
One more time. Sorry, run that last part by me one more time.
Basically, you would utilize Sigma not on an off angle, so that when you did get a cooldown advantage, you could push the cooldown advantage easier because your tanks enabled each other to take space. Because Orisa at that time wasn't really happy with just walking into the enemy team, even with Fortify. So you'd use your Sigma shift, you use your Sigma shield to be able to press W.
Yeah, so that really comes to me though, like, were we really struggling to just go, hey, instead of just trying to rush forward, etc. Like, I understand, yes, we have more ability to rush forward if our Sigma is stacked on top of our Orisa. What's stopping our Sigma from, sometimes the map geometry doesn't allow it, but I'd imagine most situations your Sigma can just deepen their angle. Like, you can win a fight by going, hey, we're going to push forward and run you over, but you can also just go, we're going to take this a little slower and we've earned a deeper angle, so we're going to have our Sigma take it as well. But and that's going to relieve pressure to push forward.
Right, and that was something that we started to execute more with Sheer Cold towards the end of my coaching career, is like knowing when to push, and like when you can push, and how your angles being able to push more aggressively was more important. Now, these heroes are nerfed, and we're getting towards the end, and this is when we get to a really an interesting period of time. Now, I'm coming from EU contenders, but I think at that time, this is when people started to realize that EU is legitimate. Obviously because I started coaching there, the region instantly just tripled in strength. And we saw double shield maintain. It's like double shield still hung around off and on. We saw some brawl. So actually brawl had a little bit of research. And when I mean brawl, I mean like the Protect McCree, Cree May, that would come around. Right. And then very interestingly, for about 1 month, we actually saw Brawl Dive, and this is Winston, D.Va, Sombra, Reaper, Moira, Lucio.
Yeah. So, sorry, Sombra with who? Sombra, Reaper. Interesting. So we're running this as a Brawl Dive, and I ran into that when I did an analysis of, I think, the runner-ups on maybe the North American side of Gauntlet. I saw it with Tracer instead of Reaper, and then I saw the other team swap to Reaper. And I wasn't familiar with these. I mean, I'm familiar with Sombra Tracer. I recognized that comp from years ago, etc., and I know how that's executed, but I saw the other team come back with Reaper. And I look at that and I can go, so what do you, like, you're clearly executing it as a brawl, but are people not setting up their angles to dive? Are they really just going, hey, we're a brawl, we're running straight at you? Like, so what's the thought here?
Basically, this is, I think, double shield or Brig or whatever had been hit again, typical like Blizzard patch. They didn't hit again, so they fall out of favor. And teams are starting to play Sombra. They're starting to play like Brawly-ish. But basically, what had happened is, whenever Sombra's enabled, you try and play heroes that can survive and deal around her. So you have a meta that kind of forms itself around that, whether it was the best or not, whatever. But you had heroes that basically, it was an ironic dive because it was the most undiveable dive that there was.
No, I still think Tracer's less diveable than Reaper, but that's debatable.
So, but still, the idea is there. Now, the way this was played, and so this is when I was very firmly with Sheercold. I'd been with them for about a month at that point. And they had a reputation for double shield OTPs. And this was, and also the team that choked in trials. So we are choked in contenders. So I joined on, we'd worked on our mental and performance, and this meta comes around, and there's a little bit of moaning and groaning because we're like, oh no, this isn't double shield, we don't know dive, like Backbone doesn't know how to play Sombra, Shade isn't a good monkey, yada yada yada. Well, we crushed it, and we came, I think, either in 3rd or 4th place that month, because we solved it very quickly. And it was, hey, my Sombra is going to be on an off angle, and she's going to stay there, and that's it.
Okay, but why not make your Reaper a Tracer and have your Tracer also on an off angle? I'm still objecting to the concept of this comp.
The composition worked with your Sombra has an off angle permanently, and your tanks, you basically tank trade. You walk in, your Winston places bubble that enables your Sombra to go more aggressive on the angle. You bubble, breaks, you matrix, your Winston zap, 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 your Reaper's up in their face, and then you chill out again. And if your Sombra has been able to sustain on the angle, you've built more ult charge, you've put out more pressure, you've maybe gotten a hack that will lead to a kill, and then you just win off of that. The reason teams ran Reaper is because the proximity of this comp, because it had no poke, it ultimately always ended up in melee range. And at least from, we didn't have Overwatch League level Tracers, but from across the board, the entire region, teams couldn't get anything done with Tracer. You'd poke and poke and poke and poke, but against the Sombra, the D.Va, the Moira, it was too much of a liability. It was difficult to get pressure done. And Reaper basically, Reaper was basically there, you have to matrix. You have to, your Winston bubble breaks, et cetera, et cetera. That was basically what Reaper's job was. He just put more pressure in that space, and he didn't die because he also had a shift cooldown.
So I understand he doesn't die because he has a shift cooldown. I understand that the proximity is happening because you guys are running Winstons, which is forcing the proximity to happen. I mean, how hard did people try to break this meta with other things? Because it sounds, I don't know. I look at this and I go, okay, so I see these, etc., but it's got no vertical mobility. So how does it run if we try to play snipers with Briggs against it? You get what I'm saying?
Yes, so Tracer was a swap. Tracer was a very, very common swap against any unfriendly compositions. If you played Zen, if you tried to play snipers, you would go Tracer instantly. Reaper was the Doomfist, of the Orisa Sig Doom, right? He filled the same role where he was very bad against non-mirror comps. He was good in mirror, but was instantly you would swap Tracer. And you usually had your hit scan on the Reaper as well, not on the Sombra, so you could make that swap whenever you needed to. And we often did. So
I mean, I can see it. It's interesting to me that Sombra and Tracer couldn't do a little more poke it out, etc., while you stayed away from them and wore them down. Because Moira does have some sustain issues. That comp has some sustain issues where, hey, if Winston has to use his bubble, he's worthless.
So the problem with Tracer is the position with which you would want to poke with was difficult to support with the supports that you were running. So you're gonna either, number one, have to put your Tracer with frontline, which she's just not gonna do much, or she's gonna off angle like she normally would, but who's gonna support her? Moira on the off angle? It was hard enough supporting Sombra on the off angle, which was a priority, much less add a Tracer in the mix as well. She literally was self-sustaining.
What happens if you swap your Lucio for a Brig? Was it that vulnerable to the other team diving up?
Yes. Because at this point, Brig was at 225, 200 HP for the first iteration. And obviously the lack of mobility, the lack of movement, and more than that, lacking a boop for the enemy Reaper was worse. Boop was better than Bash against enemy Reaper at that point in time. So you do still have a Moira pouring heals. If the Reaper gets on top of your Brig, I agree, and eventually that's going to happen. But I'm thinking, is that worth the trade for being able to sustain your Sombra in their backline longer, sustain your Tracer in the backline longer? It could have worked.
You are pro trade to get away from them. Interesting. That's fine. I'm fine. tweaks that we potentially
Sure.
could have made here. If I'd been around, I'm sure I would have tried, and
Sure.
I'd have found out, oh, this is why it doesn't
Sure.
work, or oh, you guys are all fools. Why didn't you
Yep.
do that? But
Yeah, exactly. But something would have been figured out. The other thing as well is that similarly to with the Orisa BAP, where people would look for a cooldown advantage and push the cooldown advantage, that was the same thing here. You force monkey. Oh, their monkey wasted bubble. We go in. And Lucio's speed was extremely useful for that type of basically push, where you didn't have to rely on, hey, our Winston has to jump to push this advantage. We can just amp speed.
Sure.
So that was kind of coincided. We saw some teams playing Brawl, Obey Alliance / Raspberry Racers, like the Brawl a lot. They put Lethal on the McCree, and he would just go hard flank. Hell von Ryan, obviously a lot of good things in Chow and Diva. A lot of different stuff there. One other thing that I will definitely deserves being brought up is this is when we saw the avoided comp come into play. I don't know how much you know about that.
No, I mean we've seen lots of iterations. I remember doing some coaching work with a team called, Avoid List or things like that.
Yes.
Like, I mean, this avoid thing has been a trend in Overwatch.
Yes.
But what was our avoided comp?
So it was like,
spell it out.
It was basically, we are going to play heroes that take the map control away from you because there's so many of us. There's Ball.
So we're gonna play Overwatch.
Right, Ball, Diva, Pharmercy, Tracer. Lucio was really generally the other one. Interestingly enough, it initially had been like Ana Zarya with a Pharmercy, but they played us and they lost to us because we were running Winston, Diva, Sombra, Tracer, and we killed their Zarya off of cooldown, and we killed their Ana off of cooldown. So what ended up happening is they lost to us, and the next iteration they came back with Diva Lucio. And it literally was just, hi, you can't dive anybody now.
Right,
and they played with Sombra usually as well. And it was just, you can't dive anybody, you can't do anything, we're going to take away the map. And literally just our ball's going to roll through, our Phar's going to fish for rockets, and hopefully something happens.
Of course.
And the Lucio is just going to be a general nuisance. And it's the same thing with the Diva. The Diva Lucio couldn't really do a whole lot. But it was literally we're just undiveable, right? We're undiveable, and the big thing here is that we were very much carried by an exceptional Pharmercy. It's not Yizna, it's I can't remember Yizna.
I know who it is.
I cannot remember. I was told how to pronounce his name, but I cannot remember. Yezina or something, and the Ball player who was Ball Overwatch, who were phenomenal at their roles, and what you lacked in damage, Yizna would make up for direct rockets, and basically the composition was highly mobile, highly fast, played extremely aggressively once they got map control, and basically played to just disrupt whatever. And I think it actually became meta a lot of times in Europe because people were realizing that if you play at a fast enough tempo, if you control enough space, even double shield with Bat Brick struggled into it. Because you have enough heroes that can cause enough disruption that even, it's not just, we have to boop the monkey with our Brig, we have Ball, we have Tracer, we have or Tracer or Sombra, we have Pharah, we have Mercy, and we have stupid Lucio, and so it was kind of like too many things to worry about all at once. And infamously, that was almost the first time British Hurricane lost a game. They actually reverse swept, avoided the same month that we beat them.
And I assume they did that with some sort of Poke Brawl hybrid? How'd they do that?
I honestly don't remember. I think it was some sort of Poke Brawl hybrid, correct? Yeah. But essentially, that was the struggle. I believe this was the same month that Winston, Diva, Sombra, Tracer, or Reaper were meta. It was the same meta.
Okay.
So teams are actually on it. Because what would happen is this kind of opened my eyes up to Sombra being a counter to Ball, because people realized that, or Ball Overwatch, I remember I was hearing Backbone screaming in my voice, he's destroyed my translocator again.
Right.
And especially when he's got his own Sombra with him, it's not just, just go Sombra. It was a difficult comp because they out map controlled Winston, Diva, Sombra, Reaper. But yeah, basically.
Well, I mean, you say that, but you've just finished telling me how much map control we mostly didn't take with our Sombra Reaper Winston. Like, I know you put the Sombra on the angle, and I'm with that, but I'm still fighting about.
True, and it was the comp is just limited by its support lineup, basically. As long as you're running Moira, Lucio, and not a Brig or an Ana, you're going to be limited with how much space you can control. But anyway, that was basically, and so this is kind of what we saw. Like, we saw a little double shield, and we'd see some brawl, and then this comp would make it resurgence, then we go back to double shield, and then we go back to brawl, and it was really dependent on the patch shifts, the meta shifts, and for the most part, NA was a lot like this as well. NA had a little bit more of a tendency to play more of the double shield stuff. They liked the double shield. We even saw teams like Odyssey over in NA pull out the Doomfist with a double shield with Malthul on Doomfist. So there's a lot of variety with how it was being played. And right about this time, I think as well as like, on a side note, I think this is when Europe started to kind of pull ahead of NA in terms of overall competency. It's just swapping from meta. They became no longer the GOATs one tricks, but they actually started to pick up heroes and compositions that the NA were slower to pick up as well. And then we finally finish, I think, with the last meta that we'll talk about. I don't really want to talk about Double Bubble as much. I want to talk about the Brig Zen. And I think this is...
I'm not sure any of us are convinced Double Bubble is meta. But
Right,
and even
right.
if it was, we weren't doing tournaments. And
Right.
now we have a new pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh,
Okay.
I've got Nyang in my chat. Do you remember Nyang from Sydney Drop Bears? The Korean hit
Oh,
scam?
yeah. Okay.
Hey, Nyang.
Okay.
Good to see you, mate. Yeah, good to see you, Nyang.
So no, before we move on to this, the Ball Sigma, which
Yes.
that is a comp that I came back, I studied, etc. I'm going to go a little more in here. So we covered, we certainly covered more metas in this time period that I was gone, that was roughly a year, than we did in previous things, where it's, hey, we're going to have 9 months of Moth, we're going to have a year and a half of Dive, we're going to have a year plus of Goats, etc. So we certainly covered more there. So what do you think led to that? Was that, hey, players know how to play more styles so they can pivot faster? Was that, hey, we did this? Was that, hey, we're covering micro metas when we didn't cover micro metas in previous places, like, as Junkrat fell out of favor in place of Widow, things like that? Like, what do you think has led to that? Was it still, hey, there's a hero or two that's sticking above the rest? What do you think was the big driver? I just want to keep this sort of in our framework.
So in other words, the last couple of months, the rapid meta shifts.
Yeah. Yes.
Give me a second to think on this. I definitely think that there was a fewer dominant heroes at that point in time. And once teams had started to play a little double shield, teams had dabbled in, the Brig Zen, mobile pocket your DPS, divey-ish style. People were less sticky. At least at that point in time, most of the players had played a lot of Goats. They had played the double shield. They had also had experience with Ball Tracer, a little bit of Ball Tracer metas towards the end of last spring as well. So that the stickiness is less there. And that had been sparked because of drastic patch shifts.
Right.
And so then we're also at a point in time that fall, or this past fall and this past summer, where those patch shifts were still rapid, right? They were still rapid. We have an Echo release, we have this nerf, and okay, then that's enabled, and then that's enabled. I think the only hero that you could really argue who was dominant at that point in time, and people didn't realize it, was Echo. Echo was somebody that had not been fully explored, but she was also, number one, a brand new hero who notoriously are never really explored for generally 6-7 months at least. And then you look at the meta that you never see Echo played in, and it was Brawl metas where she just obviously can't be played in because it's hard to pocket her, and then the Winston, Diva, Sombra, Tracer, Moira, Lucio comp, or the Reaper, where it was very difficult for her to play into that. With Diva, Sombra, Hack, Tracer, Moira, Lucio, there wasn't a lot that she could do, and if you were gonna buy into that meta at all, how are you pocketing your Echo? So I think it was a combination of the strong hero wasn't really fully explored as being as strong as she was, and then the compositions that we were swapping around from were very unfriendly to her. So unlike where we saw with some of the Orisa comps where
it was effectively one of these things where we went, hey, we're exploring metas, and
Yeah.
even though you think Echo is the strongest pick at this point, people didn't know that, people didn't have it. It would have required a radical paradigm
Yes.
shift, and people needed
Yes.
a spark to get them there.
And right,
Yeah,
and
or a trial team to come up something.
Right, and there was enough creativity with Sigma is still pretty strong, but Kree is actually pretty strong here too, because fire rate, and this is when we were also dealing with 225 HP towards the end of the meta, and so over time this hero was kind of strong. Oh well, this hero is also kind of strong, and the nice thing about rapid patches is it does lead to a little more guesswork, to where there isn't psychologically players will kind of lean more towards strengths because they really don't know. There isn't that surety that, oh, this hero is definitely strong because everybody plays it. Well, now I don't know.
Right.
So it kind of forces that creativity. And then we have, Brig Zen. And I think this was really the pinnacle of the finality of what we talked about, that Raspberry Racers, Brig, Pharmacy, Overpacker, Tracer composition. This was the epitome of that meta, where you're playing arguably the two lowest healing supports in the game combined, around highly mobile, highly spam DPS, and very mobile / very resource dry tanks. Now, you said that you were kind of came back in around this time. Is that true?
I mean, I came back in probably right as this was wrapping up,
All
but
right.
it was relevant enough to study.
Right.
I needed to get my head around the game. So
Right.
yes, I went and
Right.
studied it. I went and did some team coaching. I
Right.
learned what I had to.
So I will talk on it briefly, but then I want you to take it away, because the way I have coached this meta and we had a lot of success with it was with the Briggs Zen. It was like you're playing with a ball, you're playing with a Sigma, you're playing with tanks that are very, very low resource demand. A lot of people were like, wow, Sigma, he's being picked again. This hero needs to be nerfed. And people didn't really realize that the reason you played Sigma is because you can't play Diva into Ashe, Zen, Echo. You can't play Zarya. You can, but you don't do a whole lot. You can't play Hog into that. You just bleed ult charge. You just get nuked. So you're playing a very resource light tank. And the entire meta revolved around, well, your big surprise, map control. And it revolved around, your ball Tracer fighting for angles, fighting for flanks with help of Harmony, with help of Discord. Your Ashe / Echo controlling a sightline. And, your Brig pocketing your DPS. Again, your DPS, your tanks, whatever needed to control space. Like you could always tell who were the best Tracers, or really the best Zens and Brigs, more importantly, because they were the ones not right-clicking at the enemies and across the map. They were not the ones harmoning their Sigma. They were harmoning their ball. They're harmoning their Tracer. They're harmoning their Echo, and basically saying, hey, get that Echo out of here. Get that ball out of here. Get the Zen, get the Tracer out of here. And they'd win that space, and then once you won that space, then maybe you can dive, right? Maybe you can Discord backline.
We're back to, you have to win the space control to do it. I was a little surprised. I think I heard you packing the tanks, and I certainly wouldn't expect much of that based on how I was studying it, etc. And yeah, I agree. You see these teams that are harmonying their Sigma, or in what was now the last batch trying to harmony their Diva that they were trying to run in the Sigma spot, and it's just like, please stop, please absolutely spend this elsewhere. It was very much about, hey, we have to control this space, and whoever can win this flank battle of the Tracer balls is going to do quite a bit, etc. I found it interesting. Personally, I found it a little interesting that we got quite as much Briggs. Like the interesting spot there was always are you running the Briggs or are you running the Mercy? Like that was sort of the most interesting thing that we saw there. We saw teams go both ways on it. I thought that led to some interesting matchups, that those were relatively as strong as each other. Did you ever come out ahead on one that you thought was strictly better than the other?
So a lot of it was map specific, because on maps where you could basically place your Zen in a safe location, you obviously got more value out of the damage boost than armor pack, especially once overpack had been removed. So when it comes to fighting, controlling angles, a damage boosted Echo, a damage boosted Ashe is going to do a lot better than just an armor pack or two. But it was dependent on your Zen either being highly disciplined, highly mechanically skilled, or being set up in a location to where it was very unlikely that he was going to be pressured much. And then if you did run the Mercy, you were very heavily invested in, your ball Tracer marking. Don't let them dive. They cannot dive. Whatever you can do, they can't dive, because if they do dive, you lose.
Of course.
But in terms of favorites, no, I didn't really have a favorite. I think it was more situational and specific.
Well, I don't care what your favorite is. I care what you think is best. Come on, man. Come on. What do I think? Care what you like? Man. Your preferences are irrelevant.
See, I hate both equally, so I'm refusing to answer.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I looked at this. It looked like a reasonable meta to me. It looked competent enough. I have less concerns about some of the other stuff that I looked back and saw. I, haven't been as in depth as you were able to, go on some of this stuff. So that was helpful. But some of the stuff that I kind of looked at, I went, that's a little squirrely. And I still feel some of it is a little bit squirrely, and there were better things available. I look at this ball Sigma that we had and go, this is a reasonable comp. Like, this is balanced enough in what it does. It can do what it does well. But I kind of always felt that way about Poke Dive. Like, I felt when we had some of our best some of the best Overwatch was the, okay, not Soldier Tracer, because Soldier was always a kind of silly pick there, etc. But the pharmacy tracers that we saw on King of the Hill back in the day. Some of the things where it's like, hey, Soldier Tracer at least has enough flexibility to
Yep.
it. The Widow Tracer stuff that we saw,
Yep.
like Widow Tracer has always been a, yes, this makes sense. This comp has enough answers. It's actually got a wide enough umbrella to cover the matter.
Right.
So I like this one. I like what I've seen here. I think it makes sense, and it checks all the boxes in terms of being able to play, having good ult economy, etc.
Right. It's a weird one for me because I tend to always transfer my feelings onto others. That's pretty standard human psychology. But I feel like one of the reasons why this composition found a lot more value than it has in other times is because, at least for me, I started to realize how much pressure a pocketed tracer can do on a harder dive. Basically, if I
on a harder dive,
right?
Go ahead.
If I can harmony my tracer, I'm going to make your monkey's job miserable. And your tracer is going to have a really hard time even getting to my Zen in the first place. So like we saying, like the hybrid's ability, not just with tracer, but with the tracer with Harmony Orb, and also with Echo, who filled a very similar niche with high damage, high mobility, of just saying, you're never going to be able to engage at full HP, no matter what you do. So their ability to just basically stunt harder dive meant that you look at this comment like, Zen Mercy, how are they not just diving that off of cooldown? Well, because they can never dive. They never even get to that point.
Got it. Okay. So you're saying Harmony Orb's ability to block harder dive. I was saying, it sounded like you were talking about Harmony Orb enabling harder dive, like enabling your tracer to dive harder, and you lost me. I'm like,
when it wasn't just the Harmony Orb, it was also the DPS, because this is pre-Tracer nerf, pre-Echo nerf, and to an extent pre-Ashe nerf as well. So you have 3 very, very potent DPS, at least with Echo and Tracer, very high mobility, and even Ashe a decent mobility. So you can't just dive that. You can't just stop that. So they can always stop you from staging, always poke you out from any point in time. And enable.
I don't know about that. It's not so much that dive has always been a staging battle, and you're talking about playing it into mirrors, and so you've never been able to dive because it's always been about, if your Zen is getting crushed in dive, it's because you weren't tank trading effectively, you weren't doing it, or you were making the decision to trade
to an
backlines.
extent though, but we've never had DPS that tank traded as efficiently as we did with this and do it for free. Tracer at that point in time was at her peak of strength with her fall off damage, with her pulse bomb. And
the closest we had was Tracer Soldier. I agree.
Right. And the difference between Soldier and Echo is that Soldier, while he's poking, is diveable. Echo, while she's poking, is not. And that's really the difference there. And that's, I think, the key difference for me is like the lines for Echo and Tracer, at least, between dive DPS versus spam DPS started to become blurred. Obviously Tracer's more dive, but like you have heroes that just had higher damage, higher range than we've seen with that level of mobility.
That's a theme that we've been coming into, where it's these heroes that can do multiple things well, that can fulfill multiple sides of the thing. And we made Tracer too poke heavy with, Tracer gets to do too much Shepherd value. It gets to do too much. I'm going to shoot you around, and I can actually shoot you around from with cover, not in any serious amount of threat, without spending a lot of blinks. And, okay, it's not real heavy poke, but it's meaningful poke. On top of Echo, Echo is a fully fledged diver. Echo is a fully fledged diver, a little weak for a diver, but a fully fledged diver with a full poke kit as well, which is just kind of like, okay, we've got that. And then we have, Brig, and we've talked about that as, again, fully doing 2 different things at once, etc. We've really done a lot of this in terms of how we're stacking our heroes. So it's been interesting, and I think we're going to continue to see that in future metas.
And I hope so, because I think while there are the concerns with the power creep and having heroes that are with 2 loaded kits, I enjoy, as I'm sure you do as well, analyzing and coaching and learning heroes that aren't one-dimensional. I think it's just going to be about finding the balance of like how much value does the utility / hybrid value that this hero has, is it going to be too strong? You look at a hero like Echo, I love the mobility and the damage. I think she's a great design hero, but is it too much damage? Is it too much mobility? Is it having too much of the cake and eating it too, right? And I think that's the balanced discussion and the tricky part for Blizzard anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely the tricky part. I think the answer is yes, by the way, but I think that is the the tricky question.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll be curious to see where they go. I'll be curious to see if they just go, "Hey, we're going to do rounds of massive nerfs on everyone, so that we can keep, so that when we release powerful heroes, we're
Hmm.
not constantly, like they're going to be releasing heroes that are more powerful than previous heroes.
Yeah.
That's going to happen. I'll just be curious if we get sort of massive nerfs across the board
Mhm.
along the way, or if that's going to have too much of a, oh, I don't like it, I'm leaving type of
Right.
thing.
Right.
But we'll see.
We will see, indeed. So my question, I guess, to kind of wrap this up, because we're up to basically to date. Double Bubble is a composition that I don't think.
Eh.
Yeah, I don't think that it's going to stick around for too much longer. If it does, I would be surprised. I think Zarya is too much of an anomaly in that comp.
Liability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
But the problem is everything's a liability. But
Yeah,
yes.
yes.
Well,
So
maybe
we'll
not
see.
Orisa now.
Yeah, we'll see. So yeah, that brings us up to my, I guess, my last question here is, I'm looking at the hero cast right now. What, like, I'm not gonna even try to guess what's the next meta, and I don't think you would either. But what are some heroes that are on your radar in terms of being potentially meta defining, either by their existence or by their absence, I guess?
If we look at this, and if we look at this by role, we can sort of list out, hey, what are our strongest few heroes right now?
Yeah.
And I think I'd actually be curious if we're on the same page. So I'm looking at the cast, and I'm going to start with tanks. And as I look at the tanks, Ball is still on my list even after the boop nerf,
Yep.
and so is Orisa. I look at those, and those are my two outstanding tanks. Now, those don't work together great, but we've been exploring, hey, more hybrids. There are things you can do with those, etc. So I'm not hammering this out yet, but this is a place that I'd start. And then if I moved on to support, it's obviously going to be, I mean, nothing's changed. You can nerf Discord Orb 5%. It's not changing my opinion on Zenyatta. And then I'd look at Brig as the other hero that's still doing a lot there. We could pick other heroes, but I'm looking at that, as these are still the two nails standing up a little bit. And, I look at damage here, and you're never going to be wrong if you pick Tracer. You're never going to be wrong. I mean, maybe someday you'll be wrong, but you're never going to be wrong if you pick Tracer. And then you sort of get into, okay, well, who's really stuck their head up a little bit above? You could still say an Echo. I'm still split on whether that's still true. You're seeing McCree's getting a lot of ladder value, less organized play value,
Yeah.
but he's there. So I'm just going to list out what I've done here. Is I've listed out 4, 5, 6, 7 heroes. I don't think these 7 heroes are going to be played together as
Right.
the next meta, but you look at, go, what gets me 2 of those? What gets me 3 of those? And you start from there.
Right,
So if I
right.
were to look at that, I'd sort of be like, is it the tank line?
Yeah.
I mean, Zen Ball's still going to be powerful. Zen Ball Tracer still works. Do I then just run what was the last meta
Right.
ball comp except stick Orisa in there?
Yeah.
Orisa's vulnerable, but if I'm keeping a Brig, maybe that's okay because
Yeah.
Orisa's not that vulnerable with the Fortify.
Yeah.
Like that might be a place that you'd start. Or it could be, hey, people are going to try something like this. Let's completely paradigm shift. We've made Orisa powerful, so let's go hard poke. Let's try running, double snipers again,
Yep.
etc.
Hanzo is still strong. Hanzo is still very strong.
Hanzo is still very strong. Hanzo could easily be on that list instead of McCree. Maybe he should be. Hanzo, he probably should be, but I'm just,
just
thinking what
spitballing.
I've seen, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I think tank-wise, I definitely agree with you with Orisa. I think everybody agrees that this Orisa buff is going to be, if there is not, like, the thing with Orisa is she's strong. She's unquestionably strong right now. The question is if she's strong enough to dictate a meta. I don't know that yet. It might be that Brawl just is better or dive hybrids with Baller are still better, but Orisa is unquestionably, the ability to not critical hit on a Fortify is huge. I think Wrecking Ball is still rightfully described as still a strong tank as well. I think Reinhardt is very quietly growing to be quite a strong hero.
Yeah,
I think
he would certainly be a sleeper pick to support something. Like if you look, go ahead.
The problem with Brawl that I see right now is that teams have gotten better at beating it. Like since GOATs, like teams have become smarter. Like, okay, this is like the play style required to, and also sustain metas. Like in general with Brawl, like what are you playing with Brawl? Are you playing a Kree? Well, Kree's pretty good right now, so that's fair enough. But like May's not as strong as she used to be. Reaper's not really a great option either. A lot of the more attractive DPS, like the Tracers and the Echoes, don't go very well with Reinhardt, at least from what we understand right now. Same with Hanzo. So Reinhardt's like a strong hero individually, but he doesn't have a really great cast around him to support that role. That type of play style, I mean, right now.
There's ways we could do it. Like you could get something weird like Kree Sombra, and that's not impossible. I'm not saying it's great, but like I could see something like that where it's like, hey, let's Go
Yeah,
ahead.
but I look at Ryan as a standalone, fairly strong hero right now, just not particularly favored by people that complement him. For the support, I think, Zen, as long as Tracer and, map control and angle control is going to be strong, Zen being able to pocket somebody is going to be really strong. Outside of that, hard for me to say. I don't think really any support stands out to me. I think Moira's just trash, and Moira will I don't think I'll be surprised if we see Moira.
She's training wheels. She's always
she's training wheels, exactly.
It's very rare that she lasts in a meta. I mean, I understand she yes, her not being able to beat Hives can give you some cute little tricks, etc.
Right.
But in the vast majority of situations, you can upgrade to a Zen eventually, or upgrade to. Go ahead.
Right, exactly. For damage, I think Echo is still good, but Echo is fairly not fair, but somewhat affected by meta. So if we do see Brawl meta, I don't think we see Echo, even though she might be strong. Ashe is still, I think, decent. Genji's trash, Bastion's trash, Doomfist is trash. Hanzo, I think, is strong. Junkrat is not good. McCree is more of a niche pick, I think. But I think he actually fills his role now. I liked his HP buff. I think if he becomes dominant again, they might want to look at his fire rate again. But I do like the fact that he actually fills the archetype of some form of anti-dive now, instead of, hi, this hero is just as squishy as any other hero.
I don't like what it's done to his dueling potential. Like,
That's
I'll fight
true.
you on that a little
That's
bit, where
true.
I go, hey, he's a little too powerful in individual play, ladder type play, etc., compared to the cast. In organized play, you can crush him with a dive, but he's a little too powerful. Like, okay, I'm going to try to force a one-on-one with this guy with anyone that isn't a sniper.
Yeah,
good luck.
that's true.
And
That's
it's
true.
a little, that's
true.
not great.
That's true. For the other heroes, I mean, Sombra is a hero that we just hope is never meta.
Hey, if we want to give health charge back to health packs, I am happy to do the Eska meta all day long.
No.
All day long.
Oh no! Hey, take damage, guys. Let's build ult charge. Oh gosh. I don't know. Symmetra might be a fun one with Brawl if we see Brawl again. The 25 HP is certainly nothing to sleep on, and her ultimate remains suppressive. But I don't know. She's so very vulnerable. Like, actually, she is a little less vulnerable to dive now, which is kind of an interesting one. The Tracer one, I think Tracer is going to be, as long as she can be pocketed, she will be good. If she can't.
Yeah, but again, I think it's like Echo, where she could potentially get forced out. We saw Tracer getting forced into some weird brawl comps, etc., because she was just that powerful that it wasn't to throw to do so, I noticed. But, we could see a situation. Again, if you look at Orisa and go, maybe Orisa's the new meta-defining thing, and you go, okay, it's going to be a poke, and it's going to be a poke that's resistant to brawl, so we just give it a little more anti-dive, and we're probably not going to want to Tracer with that. We're probably going to go, hey, let's run McCree Hanzo. I don't want to run that. Let's run McCree Echo. Something like that. We'll see.
True. We also have to remember that Winston got buffed as well. I can't forget Winston. Another 50 armor is significant.
It matters.
He's been power creeped for a while. The HP buff, his damage to armor, the HP buff to his bubble, exactly, and the armor as well. So he's been a little power creeped over recently. I mean, I don't complain. I think Winston's my favorite tank, but still.
He definitely is, but I think Ball still beats him at what's close to his job, and I still don't like running both.
So the awkward thing about Winston right now is, like, Ball is just better at controlling flanks and angles. Like, if I have a Winston Tracer in a flank versus a Ball Tracer in a flank, it's not even close. Like, the Ball Tracer is just going to smoke it. And it's just because of the fact that Ball has a gun. Winston's gun has no range. So I'm not saying Winston should have a gun, but he's just in an awkward position to where his space control is mobile, like very mobile, but very short ranged, which is an unusual, I guess, like a little bit of a catch-22. One other thing I want to bring up to note is the Reaper rework, I guess you could say. Now, they did nerf his damage a little bit more on the live patch compared to, so I'm not sure exactly how that like translates out, but it could be interesting to see how that, if Brawl becomes meta again, if Reaper becomes attractive, because Reaper never really was played in Brawl because you could walk up to somebody and one-shot a Reinhardt. Like, that just never happened because there was always Boop, there was always D.Va. It was because he did decent shield pressure, decent threat, from like close to mid ranges, right? So I'm curious to see if we get to like the 5, 7, 8 meter range, if that range buff actually pays off. You see what I'm saying? Like,
I'm just not sure it matters because it's the spread reduction not mattering. Like, that's you've exactly hit it on the head.
That's
the
true.
Spread reduction,
That's true.
that doesn't matter because we were breaking
because
shields.
you're hitting shields anyway. True.
Right.
But it might matter more if we see like metas where, maybe you try and see Reaper force into a dive meta where you're shooting monkeys or you're shooting a D.Va instead of it. Like, unlikely. We only saw that with the Winston Reaper Sombra meta briefly, but it will be interesting to see there because the damage is it's pretty significant. It's pretty significant. But yeah, we will see. It definitely gives him more flexibility, which I think is interesting. But that does it for me. Like a lot of more questions raised than answers given. Yeah. So I guess we just wait and see.
I can live with that approach.
Yeah.
I can live with that approach.
Yeah, I'm not gonna even try to predict metas, man, because like so much of it is like it's like just a dice roll. You have no idea. So
Well, it doesn't even matter if you're right. It's like,
No.
this is the right meta. And then it's like, no, it would have been if anyone had actually trained it,
Yeah.
but no one good trained it.
yeah,
So
yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, Temporal, I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate it especially more because this was completely like last minute.
Oh, we had to. Yes,
So again, for
yes.
those of you in chat who don't know, Temporal is a good friend of mine, professional Overwatch coach, guest / content creator, VOD reviewer, ex-pro contenders coach, really great guy, knows his stuff. But today we had the plan to do some discussion over like a GM VOD review, and that got quickly thrown out because the patch wiped a replay. So at the last second, we're like, okay, what are we going to do? Screw it. We'll do some meta analysis. We'll do what makes a meta. And obviously, had a pretty good time. So, Temporal,
We definitely did.
thank you so much for coming on. I'm still learning from you, it seems.
I think today I got to learn more from you. You got to fill in my history book of, hey,
you
what
go.
happened a little bit
There you
more.
go.
I mean, I'm
Sure.
going to poke holes on it and say you coached it wrong. But that's just what I do. That's just what
Of
I do.
course, You're just disagreeable, Temporal. Well, thank you again, man. I really appreciate you coming on, and best of luck with your future content. Chat, !guest. Check out his channel. His stuff is really good, and you're putting out a lot of it recently, too. Like, I honestly can't even keep up with it.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm trying. We're doing that growth, and it's happening.
All right, man. Well,
Okay.
thank you again for joining me, and you have a good rest of your day, brother.
Thank you. You too.
See you,
Simon.
man. All right, so once again, Temporal, ex-contenders coach, good friend of mine, been around for a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for going on. We are going to be streaming for a little bit longer. I've got some other treats for you guys. And when I mean treats, I mean lots of ranting and raving and roasting, some more educational content, because I have in my Discord a message of, haven't watched, but from one of my moderators. And it happens to be an Echo guide. And it's not only an Echo guide, it's the only Echo guide you will ever need. Now that's an interesting title. What do you guys think? Do you guys think, is this trash or not? Let's find out. So we do something called Hammer Time Chat, basically where people will submit educational content to me, videos, guides, whatever, and I'm going to tell you whether it's a load of horse manure or not. Now, one of my good friends is a content creator, and we're going to be telling you whether this most recent video of his is worth anything at all. So we'll find out. Stay tuned. Yes, thank you for the donations. By the way, thank you guys for the subs, donations, and the follows. I really appreciate it. I was trying to stay focused on topic. Wasn't doing a very good job of it, but I really appreciate you guys chiming in. But yeah, I didn't get a chance to thank everybody. So if I missed you, I apologize. I'm gonna be weeping in my bed tonight, thinking about all the opportunities I missed to thank all you wonderful, wonderful people. Oh, I hate being nice, man. You guys aren't wonderful. You guys are just morons. Why would you follow me? All right, let's go. The only Echo guide you will ever need, is it trash? We will find out. And why does it say 2020? Hello, midget? Hey, esports gun. This is 2021. This premiered 150 minutes ago. 2021. You dolt. Oh my gosh, this guy is like, how old are you? Like 12 now? All right, here we go.
If there's any maniacs out there who actually share my videos, y'all are crazy. But y'all are the real MVPs.
Aw,
Nubik
cringe,
and Cho
dude.
learned to watch my interview with Spylo. We're both some of the most underrated Overwatch channels right now, and I can tell you that.
Okay, dude. All right. Listen, stop patting yourself in the back. Listen, I don't even care if you're patting me in the back. If you have to pat yourself in the back to pat me in the back, I don't want any part of it. Take that cancer away, man.
Makes Echo fire 3 shots of energy
wait,
in a
miss
primary
it.
weapon. Genji shurikens, but better. Makes Echo fire 3 shots of energy in a triangular pattern, each dealing 17 damage with 12 ammo and a projectile speed of 75 meters per second. This is the most conceptually simple part of Echo's kit, as it is primarily used for high amounts of poke against tanks or shield during the posture phase. The only thing worth noting is to be comfortable landing
Nice
shots
sticky,
against aerial
idiot.
squishies, especially Pharah, when clearing angles. Echo in theory is a great duelist against Pharah, and a key part to that is landing your much more spammy and consistent try shots. Echo's first ability, the Electrodium Explodies, Make Echo fire a volley of 6 sticky bombs dealing up to 180 damage in total, travelling at 15 meters per second. Unlike to Echo's Tri-Shot, this will mainly be used for spam during the posture phase before the teamfight actually occurs in order to gain early ult charge or to prevent and burn a brawl comp over time from distance. Stickies are also primarily used for set abilities, whether that be comboing with Halt, Grab, or waiting for the enemy ball to pile drive to easily stick them when he lands. Coach Hayes gives a good example of aerial assassination utilizing a well-timed Halt stickies here.
Flutter uses flight to position himself high above the bridge, breaking LOS with the enemy Ashe to avoid her knowing of his position. He scouts Gliss's position and sees London trying to engage, dropping as close as possible to make his stickies easier to connect, following up with a deadly focusing beam.
He doesn't cancel his
The three things Flutter did effectively were identifying and scouting his threat, breaking LOS with his target, and executing the combo.
Do make sure that during the posture phase, you save stickies in order to follow up on a dive from 1 or 2 of your own teammates, or to peel for the ball on your backline. Echo's second ability.
I mean, yeah, you just want to be using your stickies like once the team fight actually starts and have them available early on. So like use them in poke stage, but as soon as the fight like actually starts, they need to be available. I don't like. I think you talked a lot about primarily about like poking down brawl, but like the reality of the situation is just you want to use stickies in anybody that you're shooting. Like you don't want to use stickies in a Widow across the map, but like it's relatively flexible. If you're good at like guiding them, like you can land them on basically anything and put pressure on anything. So nothing, just not really a nitpick, just clarification.
Far boosters but better. Make Echo fly in the air at 8 meters per second with a 3-second duration paired with a 6-second cooldown. She can also glide in the air afterwards at a downward speed of 4 meters per second and an increased horizontal speed of 50%. Obviously you want to use flight to gain another angle, but maintaining and deepening that angle afterwards is an overlooked aspect that Temporal goes into depth here.
Here and here are places that you can end, where you have escape paths, you have cover that you can duck bind and use, etc. The next boosters you use, you get to start from higher, so you get to stay in the air for longer, and you just sort of hold space and make sure you drift down over here when those run out, etc. So that's why I wanted you to, when I was saying earlier, use boosters and go left, I wanted you to go there and not here. Because here, you just kind of end up down here, or you end up down here, and then your next boosters, that's not any better. Whereas here, your second cycle of boosters would have been better effectively. You'd have been able to maintain a steeper angle on them, which is great because they're not looking that high up, which puts you on their screen, great, but that means they're hard not looking at your McCree, who's right here and shooting at them, etc., because their screen is in this direction.
Likewise to stickies, you also don't want to waste flight before the fight begins, as not only will you not be able to follow up afterwards, but you'll also be left vulnerable afterwards, as I highlight with my Echo in this 4K Scrimrod. Ideally, you don't want to be wasting your glide. As soon as Elk jumps into the high ground, use Echo once it's positioned here. Or if you are going to be positioned on this low high ground here, you can have your glider and then you can like back out and then easy clap. And then kill the ones. If they were rotating underneath, if their Zen was on carts and then he was rotating, fine, go for it. If the Zen was rotating on stairs over here, fine, go for it. But he's really far away and he's in a position where your tanks can't dive. If you were running Lucio, Tracer, Genji, like fast mobile characters and not spammy DPS, again this would be fine. But in the context of our team comp, this isn't good. Winning Echo 1v1s also come down to shift usage and distance factors, as Nata OW explains here.
The distance between both these Echoes is very minimal. Let's say if Pink Echo decides to shift up in the air and go up high, right? This Echo shifts first, right? Then this Echo will go down first. That's just how it works. This blue Echo now can shift up and will hit this top maybe when the enemy Echo is maybe like over here. This gives this Echo a massive advantage where this Echo can sort of like tower above and sort of just basically hit really easy shots. Imagine if you were the Echo, this Echo here, and for some reason, you shift it to poke, right? You start going down and the enemy Echo shifts on top of you. You're forced to look like this. This is not a great look for you. You have to shoot the Echo, plus hit land stickies, plus also try and beam while you're going down. That's really awkward.
He also gives an example.
Well, that's only bad if you don't get initial value from that early shift. If you early shift and you don't pressure the enemy Echo, that's your fault.
Baiting Echoes when the distance is too long for shift usage to be impactful here.
If this person shifts, right, definitely not scared. Why? By the time this Echo shifts all the way forward, first of all, enemy Echo would have been already safe. Too much distance to cover. You can even bait. This Echo then says, okay, I'm gonna commit. While it shifts happening, your Echo now drops, and then you can shift back up and try and catch this Echo in a bad position.
That's true. That's more about wasting shift before the fight starts.
This is probably not the best for baiting you a little bit closer. Another way of also doing this is you shift up first, right? Bait the enemy Echo Echo to go up, you back up a little bit, and maybe you have a hit scan. And the hit scan, just shoots the Echo in open air and kills that Echo.
Echo's third ability, Wise.
So one thing I want to mention about shift that you didn't hit is that shift, you technically move faster once you cancel your shift. So one thing you should almost always do when you're repositioning or moving between fights, early fights, getting back to spawn, attacking, whatever, is you shift up, you cancel your shift in the air, and then you just hold space and you glide down, because you move faster when you're doing this. And remember, you can cancel shift. So like, let's say instead of getting the full, okay, let's put it this way. Instead of getting the full duration of shift and then, oh, I dropped there and then I just dropped like a, like a rock. You can use your shift to get the height that you need to get, cancel your shift, right? And then you glide down, and then you can hit your shift back again sooner, because the shift cooldown becomes available faster because you canceled it. So but I think it's significant enough to mention, like, you should be canceling your shifts to glide as much as you can, so you can travel faster and you get it back sooner.
Still in the game.
Because you had enough time to talk about a freaking Echo 1v1 and shift usage in an Echo 1v1, which is going to help like less than 0.1% of the fight time, if you get into an Echo 1v1, but you didn't talk about a basic movement fundamental of Echo. L.
Makes Echo fire a beam dealing 50 DPS to enemies above half HP, but 200 DPS to enemies at or below half HP, lasting 2 seconds paired with a 16 meter max range alongside an 8-second cooldown. The main piece of tech is to try shot and then fire the focusing beam. This is used when squishy 200 HP targets at roughly 60 to 70% of their HP, as by the time the shots land, the 50% threshold should be reached, and even if you miss your try shot, the extra 10 to 20% shouldn't be much to burn through anyway. Aside from that, the other tips about timing your cooldown usage to make engagements more effective and to prevent feeding still apply to Echo's focusing beam. Echo's ultimate, every hero in the game but better.
I mean, yeah, basically just use your focusing beam to burn down targets that you're shooting. I don't think it's very hard to waste focusing beam. But I will say that you didn't mention canceling it, which is a really, really important part of focusing beam. If you're focusing beam down this Roadhog and he gets healed back to full before you can finish him off, or you kill him, then you're stuck focusing beam. Like, how long is the duration?
Targets at sec, lasting 2 seconds.
Yeah, so it lasts 2 seconds. That's a full second. If you kill them in 1 second, because it's 200 HP per second, you need to cancel it. Don't waste another full second because you're just holding down your beam looking like a moron. Cancel it. It's less important now than it used to be because it has a shorter duration, but you need to press E again to cancel it. This ability, you need to know how and when to cancel this ability. You need to know how and when to cancel this ability.
Second, to Echo's pillars to choosing what hero. Echo's ultimate, every hero in the game but better. Makes Echo duplicate a targeted enemy hero and gains full use of their abilities. The duplication lasts 15 seconds and Echo charges the ultimate ability of a chosen hero 6.5 times faster. There are 4 main pillars to choosing what hero to duplicate. Keep in mind, some of these are not mutually exclusive, hence why when combined, some heroes will end up being more powerful as they satisfy more of the criteria, which enhances the pillar they already specialize in. The first is maintaining and threatening off-angle pressure for persistent amounts of time, with heroes such as Sigma and Orisa being prime examples due to their health pool, shield, and ranged poke. The second pillar is barreling aggression. Heroes such as Reinhardt, Doomfist, or Tracer are prime examples due to their health pool or heavy angular burst damage respectively. The third is ultimates. Likewise with heroes in the first pillar, Flux and Bongo are, generally speaking, significantly better than Whole Hog and Diva Bomb, even if most off-tanks satisfy the first criteria. Moreover, duplicating Zen to farm Transcendence in response to an upcoming grab is definitely a viable strategy, or farming ultimates with heavy utility, such as EMP. The fourth pillar is cooldowns. Not many guys talk about this, but duplicates into Ana or Baptiste for Nade and Lamp may override any value lost in their ultimates or sustained angular pressure, such as from a Sigma or Orisa. This and the previous pillar are the most situational categories. Adding a bit more nuance to these categories, here's Nata explaining a distance variable when duplicating in order to ramp up value with your duplicate over time.
But if you copy more like things that like need time to like live and charge, for example, like Zarya, make sure you're a distance away from the enemy team. Don't just copy right on top of them and expect to get value. Like even Winston, you'll copy somewhere and then you'll jump on them maybe. Or Diva, you'll copy somewhere and you'll fly on them. So make sure you understand the distance component with copy. It's a really big mistake I see where people sort of just copy from wherever and they just like, oh wow, I just got bursted. Why'd I die and build my ult? And it's because you're sort of inting. You're playing way too close.
With the first pillar, you also want to either gain an off angle that you wouldn't normally be able to get with immobile heroes with your flight, and then duplicate into an immobile tank, or already be set up from an off angle to then duplicate afterwards. You will be gaining a lot more value by doing this rather than duplicating the Sigma or Orisa in front of you. The last usage of duplicate is to act as a second life to allow you to land more aggressive coordinated hits on the enemy, I only really recommend doing this in a scrim environment where your coordinated dive or hit on the enemy team gets stopped by an enemy support ultimate, in which case using your duplicate to add more sustain wouldn't be a bad idea. However, do keep in mind that the rest of your dive crew work in cycles, so as soon as your first hit gets rebuked by a support ultimate whilst in duplicate, don't engage until your dive crew regain cooldowns. Moving on to the last section, which is playstyle, positioning and team compositions. Echo serves a somewhat similar job to Tracer and has a similar level of flexibility. Here's Barlow explaining how to best utilize Echo when playing against Rush or Fast Life comps here.
If you Harmony Orb your Echo and she just permanently hunts down that monkey or hunts down that Tracer, you're gonna make it so much harder for them to die. Like that bit was a little slow and a little bit clunkily worded. It was like a little bit wordy. You know what I'm saying? If you could have simplified that and like honestly like less information is sometimes more. I don't think you needed as much. Harmony Orb your Echo or your Hanzo or your Tracer, and she just literally just like goes after them and just constantly pressures them. They never really dive, or they never dive properly, and they certainly never dive at full HP. You force a Matrix, maybe you force a Monkey Bubble, maybe the monkey's 300 HP, maybe the ball has chat, we have a problem. We have a problem. What? We have a real problem, chat. Hang on. This is our problem, chat. Right. Here. Oh no. Oh no. What have I done? What have I done? Uses Adapt the Shields before he even goes in. The Tracer uses all her blings just to be able to reach the dive. Like, it feels really messy. That's why for a long time, when you did see Bap Zin, you almost always saw it with a Tracer.
Continuing the theme.
Okay, we're done with that. We're done with that. Yeah. Monk S, yeah. 2 loudmouths.
Playing against Rush, punishing the enemy backline when the enemy team rush forward to punish your tanks when your backline is less threatening at ranged poke is vital, as Spylo explains here.
Now look at Fletta's positioning. Is this a good off angle? If Dynasty pushes here, is Fletta going to be blowing them up? Is he going to be shooting them and killing them in the back? No, he's not. He doesn't have a great off angle. He's been bullied out of the off angle back towards his team.
Oh boy,
which
more
means
of me.
If they push here, they're not going to be shot in the back, at least for the first little bit. But the big thing is that Fletta wasn't actually able to punish the backline. So again, if we go back to when Soul is rushing here, here's the rush. Where is Fletta? Fletta is in Narnia, dude. Fletta is doing absolutely nothing right now. In fact, Fletta doesn't even have shift yet. So he literally is AFK. He doesn't even land a shot until 2 of his teammates are dead. So Fletta needed to either be packed better, something needed to happen. He cannot get bullied out as easily as he did.
Echo can also be used as a defensive pivot for Mercy when rotating your glass cannon backline against Rush, since Rush comps look to rotate and catch out your backline, as Nata explains here.
The Echo's over here, right? Then the Mercy should be flying in a position where the Mercy can help the Echo, but also peel the Zen. But if he knows
so this is the kind of stuff here, Midget, I don't think this is necessary. Like, I wouldn't devote time to this at the expense of what we're missing out. Like, you want Echo to position on off angles and spam and play more around cover. Don't play out in the open. Now, I hope that you're going to talk about cover usage with Echo, because this is so much more important than enabling your Mercy to get out. Like, this just doesn't matter. Like, this matters with what Natter is saying, because he's coaching an individual. But like, if you're putting out a 50-minute guide, enabling your Mercy to escape brawl is like that's such a niche little impact.
Aatrox backs up here, Seiko's over there, and now they're like so far away where the Mercy can't peel the Zen. So Seiko's positioning needs to also be relative to like the people who are non-mobile, so the Mercy can peel.
Moving on to broader playstyles, hard flanking can be high value but also high risk. Here's Nata explaining how to mitigate that risk through smart pathing with your flank.
The shortest path where you're basically just anti-LOSing the enemy. You know, if you're under here, they can't see you, right? If you're under over here, they may or may not see you. When you come up, right, and hit is like probably the only time really they should see you. Now, if we look at like another one, someone might say like, hey, why don't you rotate and go all the way behind? Or you could do a path like where you come over here, right, and you sort of like rotate like this. You keep going, and you come and hit behind, right? Well, the problem with this is this little like pink thing. This is where you're in their LOS, right? And as soon as they see you make this cross to StarCraft, then the enemy team should, if they're smart, adjust and like reposition maybe a little bit, or send someone to go mark you. So you may not get as much value because they scouted you.
Keep in mind that if you are going hard backline, especially if you're soft flanking, you need to clear angles in order to not get pinched and counter-dove by the enemy team, as Spilo highlights here with a British Hurricane trial player.
You have not made the ball go away, you have not burned the Echo's cooldowns, you've not forced a tracer out, you have done nothing, you've cheated and gone straight for backline, which means now you're going to be hard focused. Like, this is map control. The Echo has a good angle, the ball has a good angle. They got that angle because they used Trance and Mines, which forced your Zen and Sigma to back off. If your Zen and Sigma didn't back off, then this Echo could not do what she's about to do to you because she would be killed. You cannot go in aggressive while your backline is playing passive because their angle got cleared. So what's the simple answer? Because I know I've said a lot of big words. I do not want you going in aggressively backline. You can shoot backline, you can stick backline, but you do not go aggressively backline until your team has retaken the space.
A mixed playstyle.
It's like even that, that's like, I mean, at least I obviously believe in that, but like it just feels a little complicated for a guide, that's all.
Concepts such as poking with your team, peeling for your backline, taking flanks on the enemy team, or dueling the enemy
Two
Echo.
forehead, but it's not. Like, consider I guarantee the average SR of the person watching this VOD is 2460.
Will be ideal, especially in the mid-fight, as I'll elaborate on later.
Because here's what you want to do. If you're making a guide, you make it educational, make it entertaining. You throw in advice that beginner, like higher ranked players can find valuable, like, oh, that's a cool little tip or trick or whatever, and it's stuff that like keeps people watching. It's like, oh, this is really advanced, but you also need to hammer the basics at least a little bit, just a little bit. You don't have to spend a lot of time in it, but just a little bit.
Now, here's Nata showing a great example of positioning fit for
that might be true.
Style.
Enemy team is blue, and they're over here, and they're pushing like that. Green Echo, who's sort of like
I've got a
mirroring
piece
you.
so
We see
bad,
Echo
dude.
like go shift
We're
in
gonna
here,
rush
you
this,
can
finish
shift
this
and match
video.
the Echo, take the one-on-one. You can play with your team, and you can back up a little bit more and play with your team and sort of poke, play the high ground. You can, if you notice the enemy team going this way, like hard this way, then you can maybe like push over here and look to like go for a soft flank. Or maybe you see a ball
Dude,
going
same.
in your back line, right? So maybe you shift back and you use sticky and beam the ball and kill the ball.
Lastly, I'll be covering how to coordinate a few basic hits or engagements when playing Ball Tracer Spam Dive. Keep in mind that some of these heroes, such as Sigma or Mercy, can be swapped out for Zarya, D.Va or Brig respectively. The first thing to cover is establishing a good kill box. A kill box is an area where the enemy team passes through that your team want to kill. There's a few pieces of criteria for a good kill box. Firstly, it should be an open space so your team can more easily engage from different angles, splitting the enemy team's focus. Secondly, your backline should have LOS in order to apply Discord and Harmony, or nade and healing if you
Well,
decide.
not solely on fundamentals, but honestly, but also at the same time, your fundamentals are also like including good explanations of fundamentals. Is like, think about like whenever I do coaching, at least, okay, obviously I'm biased. I think I do a decent job of coaching, obviously. Otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. And what I focus on is like fundamentals with some spice, but it's like fundamentals that in a way that's not explained as like I try and explain it better than other people do. I think you should aim for the same. Do it with your own flavor. Don't be like me. Do what you do well, but I think you're missing on some of the fundamentals.
To play Ana. Lastly, your team should be set up around the kill box in order to follow up, and links back to the first point about it being an open space. I really want to stress that last point, since you can have an unorthodox kill box set up before the choke, but if your team is set up for it, it's essentially a free first team fight. In terms of who positions where, I personally prefer Tracer or Ball to be set up at the hardest off angle, as if they get scouted, they can quickly run away, but you generally speaking should not all be stacked coming from one direction. The exception to the rule is that if they have a Sombra, you need another teammate to tag along so that she doesn't get the hack off and is bullied away, but this should still have at least 3 different angles of pressure. In terms of target priority, don't engage on mobile characters such as the enemy Ball or Tracer, as they can easily run away, hence choose immobile heroes, which will normally be a Sigma or a Zen. Also, if the enemy team decide to split and rotate their core through the kill box whilst they have a pocketed DPS lingering behind, you can either clear the angle before deciding to hit, or more likely, your team's target priority will completely switch onto the pocketed duo and then onto the core after they've made their first rotate. Regardless of whether you successfully get a kill after your first hit, what as Echo do you do next? Well, referring back to Nata's bit about mixed positioning, you're now left in a great spot with multiple options. You can save stickies and beam to peel for your backline against the opposing Ball Tracer, you can rotate to close with your team to keep poking, you can take on the Echo Duel if resources are in your favour, and if they rotate all the way to the coastal side of point, you can either hard or soft flank depending on how much time you have, and set up another kill box if or when your team is ready. Keep in mind that this isn't always very black and white, and sometimes you'll be forced to miss out on hits with your dive crew if you or your Tracer decide to mock their Ball Tracer instead. Well, that's it for the guide. If you enjoy.
So, do you see the problem with what just happened like the last 45 seconds? Because if you don't, I'm going to point it out for you. So you're going to get it beefed you're gonna get a beef because it's good information and that there's enough in here that's helpful, right? There's no false information. But it's just so complicated, and it's even if it's not complicated information, it's not explained succinctly enough. Well, it's not just that you spoke very fast. I can speak really fast all I want to too, but I can make it like really simple. You know what I'm saying? Like your stuff, it's like you have learned so much about the game and you're very intelligent, but you're speaking as if like everybody understands this. Like you do explain your concepts, like what Killbox is, but then you want to save this for the counter dive, and like what is this? Like I'm gonna be honest, I wouldn't use a diagram this complicated for an Overwatch League team. There's no freaking way. So I understand that when you're working with like content creation, that you want to like appeal to people's intellect and like, you know, like, hey, you wanna like, this is some complicated stuff, but like it's not explained simply enough, and it's honestly too much of the nitty gritty. Well, it's not just that. I'm not blaming the UI. It's there's too many arrows. There's too many arrows and too many words on my screen right now. I have no idea what's going on. It needs to be easier to understand. It needs to be easier to understand and more like that's the reason why clickbaity stuff like works, like because it's just very like simple, basic, whatever, catchy. And for you as an educational content creator / entertaining content creator, you need to lean more towards simplicity, because with this kind of stuff, not only are you failing to educate people because they don't understand as much of what you're saying because it's too much or it's not explained simply enough, and you're boring people. You're not boring me. I understand it. I find it interesting, but you're boring other people. So content is beefed. Delivery is weak. Mainly 3.5K. Right, but again, this isn't, I'm guarantee you 3% to 5% of your views are coming from people that are 3.5K plus. And you might say, oh, well, my viewing like my content like is generally viewed by more higher ranked people. I want you to take a look at something. Do you think that these people are 3.5K? 90% of them? If you notice something about, like, I always aim to, even when I'm coaching GM or doing Overwatch League analysis, I will try and coach advanced concepts in a way that's easy to understand. I'm not saying I do that well, but that's my goal. I understand that I have to do that. You need to understand that too. It needs to happen. Because otherwise, nobody's going to want to watch this, because they're not going to be able to understand it, and like, oh, this is boring. It was just like high rank stuff, and like, I didn't understand it. Like, you need to throw in, you know, your little like snacks and treats, and oh, like try this like cancel or this advanced thing, or this is how you play into dive. But there's too much here. There's too much here. You need to take all that you've learned about the game and all you've improved about your game knowledge and be able to chew it, digest it, and spit it out as basic as you can. Like there's a really famous quote of saying you can tell when somebody really knows something when they can explain it simply. If somebody can't explain it simply if they can't explain it to like a 12-year-old, then they don't understand it well enough. Now, obviously, that's an exaggeration. Like nobody can explain like quantum mechanics to me, so that means they must not understand it. I'm just stupid, right? But for most things, you should be able to explain it that somebody has a decent understanding of what you're talking about. So I like the guide. I'm still going to give it a beefed. But players deserve feedback if they want to get better. You're a good content creator. You deserve feedback. I had 47 people send me paragraphs of what they thought was wrong with my stream and what was wrong with my coaching. You know, some of it hurt my feelings, but I got better. You need that same level of feedback, and so I'm your friend. I care about you, so I want you to get better, and this needs to get better. You have a phenomenal game knowledge, you have a phenomenal delivery, and the way you structure things is really, really good, but the delivery wasn't as good as it should have been here. You're welcome. Simplify. Yeah, I had a lot of people. I was very flattered. I mean, obviously there was the free coaching session / $10 gift card thrown in there, so that sweetened the pot a little bit. But you know, it is what it is. Just because you've been a good boy, midget, I have to pee. So I'm gonna, like, while I'm peeing, I'm gonna play your the Zoomer song that you sent me. while I'm gone. Be right back, guys.
Raider.
Honestly, I haven't even heard this song yet, so we're gonna find out. Okay, honest question, what does drill mean? I don't know what drill means. Please tell me what drill means. I don't understand. And we're gonna do some Ask Spilo, y'all. It's gonna be absolutely piping. Let's do this. Just at the P of the century. Same, man. The millennium for me. It's a genre for a type of grime rap music from the UK. All right. So let's kick up the spice, boys and girls. If you guys have any questions that you wish to ask and answered in detail, please go into Ask Philo in the Discord, !mark Discord, and jump in there and type away. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Speaking of playing British humor, not a question, but I just watched your response. I was more highlighting the lack of value when you don't know yourself. So to touch on this, because this was a question about that I answered, and then he's adding another question. Basically, he was asking, like, how do you lose, like, just not lose your cool when, like, you're, like, going with, like, a plat team and somebody makes, like, a really, 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 really brain dead mistake? Like, you're a contenders coach. Like, how can you have the patience to work with people that are, like, that bot? I'm paraphrasing, but I was more highlighting the lack of value. Don't add yourself as a coach. If the teams can't, if the teams themselves can't, I assume can't. Oh, the lack of value yourself, don't as a coach, and teams can identify obvious mistakes. I don't mean to imply genuinely getting annoyed at the mistakes, just rather the fact that you can't illustrate or provide a knowledge of the game. If you're hauled to circle on an obvious mistake, you don't need as a coach any kind of highlight. The feeling of, if I was on another team, I'd be adding more value and interest to people. Okay, so in other words, you're saying, what kind of value can you add as a coach when you're coaching a gold plat team and it feels like every mistake that you're pointing out is just, oh guys, we literally just wasted every ultimate, or we did this, or we did something really brain dead here, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking, you know? But it's not like you're not like teaching, you're just like pointing out obvious errors. So two ways of looking at that. Number one is, I always, whenever I'm coaching a team, obviously there has to be a level of improvement on basic errors. Like if my Sigma's leaving out his or her shield way too much, then we want to bring that up. And they need to know that. They might know that already, but I'll want to, highlight it. They need to get better at that. But oftentimes I don't dwell on those micro stuff as well, because I assume that to get better on its own. Kind of like you said there, I won't spend a lot of time on it because it's not something I need to coach. They should know not to do that. They should get better at that. So what I'll do instead is, like during that review specifically, I highlighted team play, communication more, because that stuff is even more important. Like you could scuff up your cooldowns, but if you have a good plan, it's okay. It's gonna those scuffed cooldowns are gonna matter a lot less. Like, do you think Overwatch League coaches like agonize hours over perfect cooldown usage and perfect positioning? Sometimes, but a lot of coaching, especially team coaching, comes more about understanding the concepts of the game better and executing as a team better with communication or whatever. So with that team, I knew the best thing I could do, not only to teach them, would be to teach them about teamwork and communication. But I also knew that it would encourage them more if I focused on something other than the obvious stuff. So I can't get caught up in the details. The other way I want you to look at it as well is, like, even if, like, a coach's job isn't just to teach, right? My job is not just to teach, my job is to coach. So when I'm coaching and teaching are different things. Teaching is informing you. Coaching is like encouraging you, keeping you accountable, keeping everybody focused on the same page. In other words, I could coach a team and I might not teach them like hardly anything, but I encourage them. I'm like, all right, guys, we got to train. All right, what's the plan? I solve like interpersonal issues. I keep everybody focused. I encourage everybody to work harder. Like that's coaching, right? I might be a baseball coach trying to coach basketball, and I might know nothing about basketball, but I'll have a positive impact on the basketball team because I'm encouraging. All right, guys, we got to focus. Whatever you need to do it now. Focus up. Like that's coaching. That's coaching. And coaching isn't always I have to be smarter than the enemy, like the guys I'm coaching. Right? So you're in this mindset like, oh, you have to be presenting new information, otherwise it's not coaching, and that's just false. How old are these screenshots? What screenshots? This is going to sound like an essay question, but to what extent do you think Samito's taken Brig being fundamentally broken from launch true? I don't know. I haven't thought a lot about Brig. Brig was definitely fundamentally broken on launch. I hear the anti-dive and enable DPS was like too strong. I think she's a lot more balanced now, but like it's really hard for me to have an opinion on Brig when there's so few flippin' off supports. Like, how am I going to say Brig is broken when it's either Brig, Lucio, or Zen? And Lucio is like one of the heroes that's really only works with Brawl. Like, he's just kind of bad with other comps. So, like, how am I going to have opinion when you have two other off supports? One is extremely niche, but fairly niche, and the other one is just Zen. Like, how am I going to have opinion about the third? Well, of course you're going to see a lot of Brig. Maybe Brig is annoying to play into, but, like, what? Like, I think she's a lot, like, fundamentally broken, but, like, is it Brig Lucio? Okay, so like the difference between main support, so this is where Overwatch is really kind of stupid. Main support is a team role. So in other words, main support is a player role. Let's put it this way: is a player role. And I look at off healer as like a team role. In other words, a role you fill within a composition. In other words, generally in Overwatch, you will have one main healer and one off healer. And the main support plays the Lucio, Brig off healers, and also the Mercy, who is technically most of the time considered a main healer. Main support is, you want a main support in a so you have one main healer who are Moira, Ana, Zen, oh not Zen, what am I saying? Bap, Ben, and Mercy. And your off healers are Zen, Brig, Lucio. You want to look at healers as there are heroes that provide more healing and a little less utility, which are these four, and less healing and a little more utility, right? You've got heal orb, damage orb, cold, nade, sleep, a little bit of damage, lamp, a little bit of damage, a lot of damage, damage boost, res. Whereas you have discord, fairly discord damage, which and very heavy in both. Whip shot, shield bash, shield, armor pack is less of it's more of a single target heal, right? Lucio has boop, he has speed amp, more consistent damage is more of a feature of his like role. So like with main, why people developed like things that are different from main and off healers is because people realize that, hey, I play Mercy, so I don't really want to play Mercy and Zen at the same time. Because if I play Mercy and Zen at the same time, I'm playing a hero that requires literally no aim and a hero that requires a lot of aim. That's inefficient training. So, you know what? I'm going to play Mercy and I'm going to play Brig because those two heroes don't require as much mechanics. You know what? I'll play Lucio as well because he doesn't require as much mechanics either. He definitely requires a lot of like mechanical skill, but he doesn't require as much aim. It's helpful to have aim, but it's not as crucial. So you have people would play Mercy, Brig, Lucio, the less aim supports. But then you'd have healer guys that like, you know what? I like playing Zen. All right, what other healers should I learn to play? I'm like, okay, you already have good aim. Well, then you should also learn how to play Ana and you should learn how to play Bap. those heroes are really, really like aim dependent. So your skills with Zen will carry over. So you have a flex support or an aim support who plays your aim or aimier heroes, right? And your main support, or let's say non-aim support, plays your Mercy, Brig, Lucio. Now Moira is generally played by flex support, but that's because Moira is usually comboed with the Lucio. It's not because Moira requires aim. It's just because Moira, you don't want your Zen player playing Lucio that he's never played before. You just want to put him on Moira, right? Now things get a little bit tricky when you have Bap Zen as meta. Now chat, why is Bap Zen a tricky meta? Why for a teams? Why is Bap Zen why is that tricky? I want you guys to tell me. Right, because both require aim, right? You can't just say, oh, my Mercy main, Lucio main, Brig main. You can play, you have to both require aim. So you basically have to say, okay, which one requires more aim? Your Zenyatta or your Bap? And most teams would say, I'd rather have the Zen guy be the better aimer. So we're going to put our main support on Bap, right? And that's generally what would happen. So you'd have your main support, the guy that doesn't aim a lot, play Bap. And you'd have your flex support or your aim support guy play Zen, because Zen requires a little more aim than Bap. So the difference is, the simplify things is you have aim supports versus non-aim supports. And you have main heals versus off heals. Right? And that's really the only difference. And the reason flex support is just aim. That's it. And main support is just non-aim. Just different ways for saying things. Sure, that's fine. It doesn't matter how you want to like yeah, that there's some logic behind that, Raimoli. That makes sense, or Raimol, excuse me. So yeah, there's not really a nitpick, but that kind of explains it for you. Okay, I was like, did I know that person? All right, what should but again, with regards to Brig, it's hard for me to say if whether Brig's broken or not. I think she's not OP right now, but the problem with deciding whether Lucio or Zen or Brig are broken is because your options are just limited. I think Mercy could be cataloged as kind of a hybrid because she doesn't heal a lot and damage boost is pretty good with utility. But, is Mercy an off healer or a main healer? We don't really know. She's kind of in between. But, there aren't a lot of options now. As supports come out, if we continue to see Brig, then we have an issue. But Samito is just a man-child. He's like me, but more annoying. I watch clips of me, and I'm like, gosh, I'm so loud. And then I watch Samito, and I'm like, wait, never mind. No, I'm not. So I don't know, if that's his kick or his thing. But, yeah, I take everything he says with a grain of salt. What should I be leaning on as a DPS as I'm playing the game? We'll be thinking as DPS. Almost every game I play, I just can't play without thinking. Because if I just walk into the high ground without thinking, this causes me to be very inconsistent. Making dumb mistakes like using high noon in front of row tracing. Well, the big thing, so this is an extremely general question. But I think always what I would ask myself when I'm playing any hero, and this is not just DPS, but making, what is my hero good at? What do I want to do? What do I do with this hero? So don't just pick a random hero. Pick a hero for a reason. Why are you playing Tracer? Why are you playing McCree? And then not just what are you doing, but then what is the purpose? How does this hero generally play? I think the whole play style thing that gets echoed a lot around Overwatch, oh yeah, Widow playstyles and Tracer playstyles, that's just overblown. Most of the time when you play a hero, you play it basically the same way with a couple of adjustments depending on the map and the composition you play into. But those are generally small adjustments. You don't play Tracer radically different into spam or brawl or dive. It's similar in playstyle, so you don't have to learn all these new crazy things. Just pick the hero. This is what the hero's good at. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna do. So have a goal of what do you do with this hero, and then I guess the other thing that I'd add is play with your team. And what I mean play with, I mean play at the same time as your team. So not necessarily next to your team, but make sure that you're doing something at the same time as your team, as your running out of space team. So synchronize your pressure, whether it's on Widow, Bastion, flank, Tracer, McCree, whatever. Don't 1v6. Go in, wait for your tanks to take space, wait for the enemy team to do something, and then you do something. You synchronize your pressure as best as you can. How do you calm down players who are tilted for losing a map in scrims? I mean, basically, there's not a lot you can do. You can just, guys, okay, focus. Like, what are we working on here? Remind them of like what we're working on. Remind them that, hey, bad stuff happens. Doesn't matter. Focus on what we need to do next map. And get the conversation started. Don't worry about it, guys. What are we doing this map? What do we want to do for rotations? John, Bill, Rick, George, Sandra, like where are we going? What rotation are we doing? Don't worry about it. Focus on what's next. Because everyone gets frustrated after a map loss or if things go poorly, but like make them think about what's coming up next. You stay in the moment. You don't dwell in the past. Like what do we need to be thinking about right now? Like what's the next goal? Leaves, hydrate. Thank you. I'm almost out of water. This is my last sip. But like that's just the simplest answer of doing things. Come on, Leaves. Dang it, I gotta get some water. Give me a second. Screw you, man. The thing is, hang on. Alright, sorry about that. Unruly chat. No, come on! You guys suck! Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. Okay. Alright, well, I know I'm gonna pass out from hydrological like dry drowning but you're welcome. Okay. Yoo-hoo? Okay. Oh my gosh. Alright, this is it. I'm gonna crank up hydrate to be like 20,000 points. Oh, posture check. Wait, there's a hair check in there too? Man. I'm literally like losing space. Where the heck is my brush? Hang on. Oh my gosh. Alright, let's see what we got for hair check here. I'm getting a haircut this weekend, so it's gonna be like, yeah, there you go. Have fun with that. It's not much different. Now it's just like a slightly different type of bush. And posture check. Yeah. Okay. With how quick a game of Overwatch is, how much of decisions are made in game compared to how much is expected to just be known? I mean, decisions are made in game because of knowledge that you already have. In other words, if I see a red light, I stop at the red light. I have to make the decision that, oh, that is a red light. Or for example, yellow light, right? Can I stop at this yellow light? Do I have enough time? Okay, I think I do. I don't need to stop. I can keep going. Okay, right? But that decision making comes from having the knowledge that a yellow light implies that a red light is coming soon. If you don't have the knowledge, then the decision making in game just isn't going to be correct, right? Be nice. Leaves, you're so sweet. I love you so much, my friend. You give me so much cash. It's the most insincere be nice ever. But you need to have the knowledge to actually make good decisions. So I think it's about having, like, IOSX released a really good video on this, and like skill versus knowledge, and not having the knowledge isn't good enough. You have to practice having the knowledge and then applying it, but also it's impossible for you to actually make good decisions, like good skillful decisions, without actually knowing in the first place. Right, so it's like a two-way street. You need to find a good balance. Know as much as you can, but if it gets to the point where you feel like you know a lot, but you're making bad decisions in game, then you need to practice more. When do I play with my team / punch tanks versus go on long flanks as Doomfist? So we talked, like, I'm literally not even going to answer this question because we spent a long time going over it yesterday. So if you guys want to know the answer to this, stay tuned. We're going to be putting it up on YouTube relatively soon. As Tracer, I get killed or pressure out very quickly among the enemy backline. I see high-level Tracer plays roam enemy backline with the team while fully engaged. Yet I can't replicate that. What do I do after I've set up? Just hide and wait? Yes. What happens if our team is never able to get a clean engage? Well, then engage with 4 of your team or 5 of your team, or anytime your tanks are doing anything, that's your cue to do something. How do I play Tracer in a brawl, especially with a new damage fall off? Take an angle and just keep pressure. So what you lose in terms of like raw damage, you make up for with length that you can play there. So pay very close attention to your timing. So I think this has very, very, very closely to do with this. Like, it seems like you're struggling to know when to time your pressure, and that's something that you need to take time to look at and replay. And then obviously spend more time being aware of where and when your tanks are going in. And keep in mind, it doesn't always have to be the enemy backline. So if, for example, if this is the enemy core and this is your core, you don't always have to be back here. This is good enough oftentimes, depending on the situation, depending on the class, but you don't always have to be all the way back here. You don't want to be frontline, but you can be here or here or here, depending on the situation. So be flexible. All right. What's the difference between having space and having map control? It's the same thing. Like, these are just complicated terms to just say, hey, you have spots in the map that you like, the high ground, flanks, etc. Also creating space and taking map control, same thing. Same thing. Like, a Reinhardt can create space by walking down main, a Winston can take space by jumping high ground, a Reinhardt can take space by clearing out a flank, a Winston can take space by jumping their backline and forcing them to turn around and deal with them. That's the same thing, and allowing his team to walk forward for free. So it's the same thing. As far as I know, you could probably be nitpicky and find a minor difference, but it's not worth it. I was watching an interview with Dogman's YouTube channel, the coach for Valorant team, back in 10. He talks about the need for teams to be bound up so that the politeness, humbleness erodes away, so that teams to bound? About the need for teams to bound so that the politeness, humbleness erodes away, so that teammates can be themselves. That's when the team can bound and trust each other. Bond. Teams to bond. When teams can bond, trust each other to get the results that are showing how difficult the coach has been. I think like politeness and humbleness. So like I agree to an extent. Like in terms of like you want people to relax. Like I was just talking today. There's like the recipe for success is like a tricky one because there's a lot of different ways to make a good cake. You know what I'm saying? But one of the ways of doing it is like to spark an environment where learning is fun and training is fun and like less stressful and just having a good time. But you also don't want to like overdo it and have people like stress and like or be too relaxed and not putting the work in. So the perfect balance is to find people who are dedicated and committed, and then to help those people become relaxed, like, and just kind of become themselves and just relax. Because like ultimately you do kind of want, a lot of teams find a lot of success with a very much family environment, right? Everybody has a good time, everybody trusts each other, everybody's like ready to commit and learn and train, and like there's nothing that you dread. That's a very important component for success for a lot of successful organizations, successful teams, etc. So I agree with this. My only thing I disagree with, like the politeness, humbleness, I don't think that for you to be relaxed and to trust your teammates and have a good time, you can't be polite and you can't be humble. If you mean like fake canned politeness or humbleness, then yes, obviously like you don't want to be like, oh, this is just the correct thing to do, so I must do it. But like we also encourage like selflessness and trust. And you know, I spent a lot of time when I was working with ShareCold about like, if you have a problem with your teammate, you need to phrase it. You need to communicate to your teammate, talk out the problem, figure it out. But you also don't come in there like a turd and be like, "Yo, you suck. What's going on?" You need to be polite. You need to be considerate with what you're saying. So, I mean, I assume you're paraphrasing, but I think this doesn't really tell the full story. How do you build up a solid pool of taking map control is like taking high priority space? I mean, yeah, but the whole point is that you're taking a space that you want, you know, you're taking map control that you want for either of those. How do you build a solid pool of heroes as a hits game player if you want to become a professional one day? What's the thought process in deciding which heroes to pick up, learn, and master? I mean, a lot of it is you start with like what's fun, but ultimately you do have to build a pool of like what heroes are generally like meta and match. So like, you know, everybody, you know, Tracer and, you know, the Ashe and Widow. I can't draw with crap and I don't care. Widow, Kree. It's slowly, progressively getting worse. Those kind of the heroes that you want to start with. So like part of it is you do play what's fun, but also you have to play what's good and like what hit scan is good at. But that I would start with that. When deciding what heroes to pick up, learn, and master, you have to look at what heroes are good, and which hit scan heroes are good, and you need to learn those one at a time. How would you like to buff Doomfist, or how would you buff Doomfist without taking him OP without feeling the entire place be mad at you? I would buff him. I don't have any specific ideas, but I would buff him by increasing his ability to duel or pressure or like support, like, and live on angles and take angles. But I would probably nerf his ability to one shot. So like not even his punch, like the punch can, like you can nerf the punch damage on a wall, that'd be fine, whatever. But it's more of like the slam shot uppercut. Like the amount of damage that can do and how quickly it can be done is just really stupid. Like if a Doomfist slams you and you're a squishy and you weren't, like you're dead instantly. So the hero is designed around being very punishing. Like you can punish a Doomfist very hard if you're aware, but he can punish you very hard if you're not. So the way to do it would be to reduce his one-shot potential through slam combos and punch combos, and increase his flexibility at like shorter ranges, like give him more mobility and stuff. But again, I don't have any hard answers, and I would have to think way too hard about it. But that's a general guideline I would like to see him go for. What abilities would you have if you added Overwatch as your next hero? I have no idea. Like I haven't thought about this as much. I'm personally a big fan. So I come from an MMO where what I used to, where there was like rapid ability usage that you could combo an animation cut. That's why I always liked Genji. So having a hero that was similarly to Doomfist and Genji, like rapid combos, would be fun. But it wouldn't necessarily be like punchy and brawly. Maybe something like more mid-range that you could like animation cancel your weapon and do different things with it, like swap from this to that, and I don't know, that would be kind of fun. But that's about the only idea I have. What is the most important thing when one become a coach? Like to know, knowing how to communicate, and staying on top of your improvement. A lot of coaches just kind of coast and it's like, oh, I know the game and just no team is smart enough for me. But you have to really work in your communication, and you need to be constantly looking for feedback from your players, managers, other staff members, whatever, and constantly improving your game knowledge. Like you have to understand that improving as a coach is just same thing as improving as a player. The difference being that it's a lot harder to get better, because it's a lot harder to get feedback as a coach than it is for a player. Like a player knows what he or she needs to work at, because like you can ask a coach or ask a player, or like you can look at your feedback and you can look at your replays and stuff, at least at the pro level. But as a coach, like it's hard to talk with other coaches, and who gives feedback to coaches? Players. But sometimes players don't always have, like it's hard, but you need to be constantly looking for feedback. Like VOD review your coaching kind of a thing. And communication is a big thing. Do you think Hanzo, Kree, Pharah, Soldier, Genji, and Doom is strong enough would make a good hero pool for flex DPS on Diamond? Hanzo, sure. Kree is probably not necessary. Pharah is good. Soldier's definitely not necessary. Genji and Doom of strong again. Sure, that's fine. I would probably you definitely need to learn Echo though. And if you can, I would learn, so like you threw in Kree Soldier. If you're gonna learn a hit scan, learn Tracer or Sombra. Those heroes cover way more gaps. So like you have Hanzo, Pharah plus Echo, right? So that's a really good projectile pool. And then you have one flanker that you can play competently. And I think that's a really, really good pool. But I don't think Kree or Soldier are necessary at all. And Genji, Doom, obviously if those become stronger again, sure, those are fine. Last question, how would you go about breaking a spam comp on Blizzard will be with Rein? Think Orisa, Sig, Bap, Kree, Genji versus Rein comp with Ana Lucia, Rein. I didn't start to Winston in the game, so what I would do is I would either, number one, try and clear high ground, but if they're on the opposite side of the high ground, so in other words, if we're thinking Blizzard world, we're like thinking the high ground here, right? And then there's like the turret up here, you know, and this thing up here, right? And then the stairs down here, and then there's the high ground over here, like the bridge over here and the bridge over here, and then the cart kind of goes like this, right? The cart goes like, this is a real drawing, by the way, okay? What I would do is, as a Rein, is I would either go and contest high ground, like go and clear high ground. But if they're all grouped in high ground, then that's kind of still a long distance you have to traverse. So what you could do is you could push cart to like here, and then you could push cart from underneath high ground. So like force them to drop to spam you. Like play underneath high ground, play underneath high ground. So basically you either clear their space or you play in a way to where the space doesn't matter. So in other words, you clear the high ground or you play along here where the high ground can't shoot you. You make them drop, and then when they drop, you can rush them. And if let's say they just drop Orisa to bait you out to chase the Orisa so they can spam you in the back, well, then is Orisa going to do enough damage dropped? No, it's just Orisa, so ignore her too. Just keep pushing cart. And if really the only time you'd have to clear high ground is like when the cart gets to the very end, and even then you can just like bite, hold on guys, you almost capped, and then you force them to do something. So what I assume you're like, if you're losing on that comp to spam, I mean, obviously that's probably a pretty good comp, but you need to prioritize avoiding their spam. Avoid and hide from their spam, or clear out the angles where the spam is playing from. Winston's not going to help very much. Winston would need a lot of support, and you're better off playing it with the Rein D.Va, or with the Rein Zarya, who the Zarya will help you once they do drop to kill them. D.Va would probably be better as well, but your D.Va would need to be disciplined and not take damage until the fight actually starts. Okay. You're welcome. So that is all. We've had a really scuffed stream, starting with a complete reversal on what I was expecting us to work on. But we followed it up with Hammer Time, some Ask Spilo as well. Tomorrow, I don't know. I'm anticipating some Overwatch League analysis tomorrow, so we're going to be mixing it up the pot a little bit this weekend. Well, I do either that or I think I have a team review. I'm not sure, Chad. I don't know squat about my schedule, okay? But it's gonna be fun tomorrow. Stay close. We're either gonna be coaching a team or doing Overwatch League analysis tomorrow. If not, it'll be vice versa, and I'll be doing Overwatch League analysis day after tomorrow and team tomorrow. I have no idea. So it'll be a pog champ, as the children say. Thank you guys for stopping in. I appreciate it. Hope you guys had a great time. I had a lovely time as well. We've got a lot more Hammer Time and Ask Spilo in the future, so we're looking forward to that. If you guys are interested in coaching, !coaching, jump in the Discord, you'll get more information there. You guys have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Spilo out.